Hey friends, this is Bennett. I don't have a joke after that. I don't know how Otts makes a joke every video. So, this is me pulling an Otts, and that's not me trying to steal from... Anyways, so a couple weeks ago I did all the killer adepts on Springtrap. Now, I didn't win with these, I just used all the adept perks on every killer. And instead of letting that go to waste for something, I figured, why don't I use that to talk about every single perk for Springtrap? So this isn't going to be necessarily a tier list video. The way this is going to work is I'm going to go through every single perk through the killers and their adepts, and I'll talk about the general perks in their own section. But this is just an excuse kind of to go through every single perk and demonstrate what it can do for Springtrap and how good it is on Springtrap. Because with Springtrap, he's in this weird situation, like I keep saying, where he's kind of like a hybrid M1, M2 killer, where you're more leaning to M1, but you M2 sometimes, so he can be very difficult with that. He has some stealth aspects, all of this stuff. So some perks interact in some weird ways with him, and some he can use better than others, blah, 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 like a lot of killers. And while I could just do a tier list, I think it would be more interesting to go into every single perk individually. With all of that said, strap in, it's going to be a long one. And we're starting with Trapper. Trapper's three teachables are Agitation, Brutal Strength, and Unnerving Presence. I'm going to start off with Unnerving Presence because it's probably the worst one, not just in general, but for Springtrap overall. Unnerving Presence is a terror radius perk, and it causes skill checks to be smaller, which, okay, and it also makes them happen more often, so it can actually hurt you, depending on the builds the survivors have. But again, Springtrap is undetectable a lot of the times. Not all the time, but a lot of the times. Unless you're running Bonnie's guitar strings. But even then, 24-meter terror radius. So people aren't really doing skill checks in your terror radius very often. Not that good. Brutal Strength, on the other hand. Now, the thing with Brutal Strength on Springtrap is while I actually don't think it's necessary to bring this, if you don't want to bring Indo CPU for some reason, Brutal Strength can slot right in. So you can make kicking pallets or gens much better for yourself without even having to set up the axe. So, in general, I don't think it's super good on him or super necessary because Indo CPU exists, but it can definitely help you like glue a build together. And last is Agitation, and this one's very interesting. So Agitation is in general a very good perk on a lot of killers. It saves you time putting people on a hook. But something else this also does for Springtrap in particular, you can basically always guarantee someone is going to be hooked next to a door, which can mean that you can go into a door and tunnel someone off of hook, or just go back to the hook you need to. This gives you options on where you want the person to be hooked, which you can use to your advantage later in the match. Overall, Agitation and Brutal Strength, thumbs up. Unnerving Presence, thumbs down. Next, we have Wraith, who arguably has some of the worst teachables in the entire game, with one exception in certain situations. So we're going to start off with Bloodhound. Bloodhound makes pools of blood brighter, and they last a little bit longer. Not really good for Springtrap. There's not really too much you can do with this, even if you run something like Curtain. I mean, it can be niche, but there's a lot of other information perks that even are teachable from Wraith that do this job better. Next is Shadowborn, which makes it so if you are blinded by a flashlight, you get 10% haste for 10 seconds. The only time this is really ever going to trigger, not always, but for the most part, is when you kick a pallet. Now, what should be noted about this is that, yes, this can be kind of useful, but not really. The situation is very niche, and you have to depend on other things to go right. And honestly, if you're going to bring Shadowborn, just bring Lightborn. It's a general perk, and it basically does the same job for you. And the last one is Predator, which is probably the best one of the bunch, and something Springtrap can actually make good use out of. When you lose a chase, you get the Aura of the Survivor for 4 seconds. Combine this with Lethal Pursuer, and you get 2 more seconds of that, 6 seconds of Aura reading. Again, not the best thing in the world. Unless you're running a particular build, I wouldn't recommend running this, but if you want to go for a hit-and-run style of Springtrap, it can definitely work. And speaking of, I do want to show on screen a clip I got of the theory crafting we did while making the Adept build, as well as it all paying off in one chase. This is not something that's going to happen in every single one of these, but I thought it was so amazing that it happened within the Little War first chase. No, I have a devilish idea. Okay, so hear me out for the strategy. We throw Ripped Curtain. We throw our axe. Ripped Curtain hits them. They're injured now and mangled and hemorrhaged. And we use the undetectability to go find somebody else. And we'll know where they're going because of Predator. We're not going to get the mangled hit on her. We're too close. I have to let her run. I'll get it on him, though. I cannot believe the build just worked perfectly right there. Everything about the build just worked right there. Oh, and Bloodhound, though? Alright, next up we have Hillbilly, who has Enduring, Lightborn, and Tinkerer. And I am just now realizing that Lightborn is not a general perk. I don't know why I thought it was. Lightborn is the one I'm going to cover first. I mean, as always with Lightborn, just look at a wall. I mean, I do run this from time to time if I don't feel like thinking, so I'm not going to shame anyone for running it, but it's not really worth it if you can, you know, warrant not running it. Tinkerer is an interesting one on Springtrap. There are some builds that you can run with Tinkerer, and the fact that you have your doors just to get to the gen that's almost completed can definitely help with the situations this is good in. But you don't really need it because Bonnie's guitar strings exists. There are some situations where it would be better to have Tinkerer, but in general, I don't think it's worth it for the information. You can get it in other ways. And Enduring is an interesting case because a lot of people will wait until you throw your axe to drop the pallet, and they'll also expect you to respect it. So running Enduring can definitely help you with this. On top of that, you can run Enduring with Indo CPU and get some very good use out of this because the pallet breaks instantly, or the stun ends instantly, and then you can just break the pallet in like a second. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to run, but yeah, go for it. So Enduring gets a thumbs up for me. Lightborn is like middle of the road, and Tinkerer is also middle of the road. Nurses Adepts. So we got Nurses Calling, Strider, and Thanatophobia. I'm going to start off with Strider, because Strider is a very situationally good perk, but not really something Springtrap can use too well. Springtrap is loud on its own and can be heard through walls, so survivors don't really like hide in place a lot, so I don't think it's very much worth it. And he can't do too much with sound. However, I will mention that you can hear things when you're inside of the door, and Strider can get you hits with this. I don't have any definitive clips of this happening, but it definitely can. So that's something to take into account. Thanatophobia, the numbers of Thanatophobia look good, but Springtrap can't really play hit and run too well, even if you build around it. And even if he could, the killers that run Thanatophobia, like Plague and Legion, don't even make that good use out of Thanata. It's just, this perk is one of those trap ones where it sounds good on paper, but it really, really isn't. It should also be noted that Thanatophobia does not work when someone dies. That maximum thing, if all 4 survivors are injured, dying, or hooked, does not work once someone is dead. So this actually can hurt you if you need to tunnel somebody. Last is Nurse's Calling. Aura Reading perk. Obviously, it's going to be good on Springtrap. He loves Aura Reading perks. But this is particularly good on him because the 32 meter terror rate, or the 32 meters that it was increased to recently, can help you land axes if someone just got unhooked and you're undetectable walking up to them. Springtrap is loud, but you really can't hear him outside of about 12-ish meters. So he can definitely sneak up on people when he's doing this. So overall, Nurse's Calling gets a thumbs up, Strider gets a mid, and Thanatophobia gets a thumbs down. Myers. Myers probably has some of my favorite perks in the game. We got Dying Light, Play With Your Food, and Save the Best for Last. Now, I want to talk about Save and Play With Your Food last because they have some special interactions with Springtrap. Dying Light. Now, there was a build popularized by Aranad for the Dying Light build with Gift of Pain and some other perks. Springtrap can use this build. I'm not going to say he can't, because he can. The problem with this build, especially with Dying Light in particular, is that it requires you to be getting downs very, very fast. Now, for killers that have lethality but don't have map mobility to like keep pressure constantly or be able to get across the map all the time, Dying Light is not that good. And the reason why is because you can't constantly get downs with Springtrap. The fastest possible down you can get with Springtrap in an ideal situation is going to take at least 15 or so seconds, which for Dying Light can often be very bad. That's not even counting if you find your obsession, blah, 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 a lot of these other things. So I don't recommend Dying Light. The numbers can look good. We're in a healing meta, so the actual, like, the obsession healing faster doesn't really matter. It's like adding a penny to $1 million. It's like no one's going to notice. So I think, like, if you like Dying Light and have getting good results with it, probably maybe give it a try, but in general, I don't think it's worth it. Next, we have Play With Your Food, which has a really, really interesting interaction with Springtrap that not many other killers have. Even Myers doesn't really have this anymore, which is while Springtrap can lose tokens from throwing his axe and M1ing, obviously, he does not lose tokens when he grabs someone. This includes through the door and with the axe grab. So in theory, if you manage to get 3 stacks of play with your food and can land your axe into somebody and then grab them, you'll still have 2 stacks of play with your food for the next chase. So in general, you can stay at about 10% movement speed if you're playing correctly or are in situations and running a specific build with Celebrate Poster and Paper Plate to basically ensure you're always going to get those grabs. So that can be very, very useful. And save the best for last. Here's the thing with this perk, and I'm going to say this very nicely. Springtrap can use this perk very well. You just can't rely on it. What I mean by that is you have to treat this similar to Nemesis. You can't go out of your way to get all of your stacks or not lose your stacks. You need to run save the best for last as if it's kind of not there and just helping you in the background. When this perk works, it works, but you cannot limit test it like I've done many times. You can run this with Foxy's Hook and go full M1. That can work, but you also need to remember you're going full M1. You have no actual range. So pallets are going to destroy you. A lot of specific loops are going to destroy you. All of these other things. So I definitely don't recommend doing this. I don't recommend running save the best for last as this perk to like really define your build. But if you enjoy it as much as I do, I love this perk. Save the best for last is probably my favorite perk in the entire game. Definitely give it a try. You'd be surprised at the results as long as you try to use it correctly. So for Myers, Dying Light gets a thumbs down. Play with your food and save the best for last get a thumbs up. And honestly, save the best for last kind of gets a thumbs in the middle. So yeah. Next up, we have the Hag. Now, Hag gives me an excuse to talk about Hex perks on Springtrap. Now, we're going to get to some very good ones he has use out of, or we're going to get to some ones that he can make some very, very good use out of later. These 3 here, Devour Hope, Ruin, and Third Seal, he actually can make pretty good use out of most of these. Ruin, mostly because it's just good in general. Third Seal, because applying blindness for Springtrap is very important. That's part of why Mindbreaker is often seen as very essential for him. And Devour Hope it's Devour Hope. But we'll get to those in a second. What I do want to say about Hex perks on Springtrap is that Springtrap is the only killer in the game that gives the survivors the ability to teleport around the map. Apart from, like, Vecna's hand. So something that should be noted is that if the survivors see a Hex on the cameras, they can just teleport right to it and cleanse it. This needs to be noted. I'm not saying Hexes can't work on Springtrap. They definitely can. But it should be noted that he can help the survivors get to the Hexes faster than a lot of other killers. That being said, Devour Hope it's Devour Hope, man. What do you want me to say about this perk? It's good when it works. When it doesn't work, it's pretty bad. I will say something that does go undersold about Devour Hope is the two stacks thing. When you get 2 tokens, you get 5% haste for 10 seconds after 10 seconds of having a survivor on hook. This can actually be very good for Springtrap. It means you can walk around with your axe in hand and not suffer the 110% movement speed penalty. Or if you don't have your axe, you're 120% movement speed. It's actually pretty useful. Like, honestly speaking, yeah, I just recommend it just for that alone. But the exposed effect basically puts the game into a standstill for a lot of people, and Springtrap can really defend his totems very well. In contrast to what I said earlier about survivors being able to use doors to get to totems, so can Springtrap, so that should be noted, and he can go there undetectable and kind of just wait. He can also put his axe on the totem and know exactly where, if the survivors are coming to cleanse it, as well as if you run Phascoin, you can put your terror radius right on the totem so they'll never know. Unless they get brave and sick of it and just are like, you know what, fine, terror radius has been there forever, I'm going to do it. Which brings us to Hex Ruin, which is, since it's buffed to 150%, overall just a good perk. It really is. This is a pretty good Hex. It can help you out. And with people pre-running Springtrap a lot when he goes out of a door because they get the notification, you can actually get a lot of regression from this, more than you would think. If you combo this with Mindbreaker as well, you'd be surprised how much pre-running can actually hurt the survivors more than it helps. So highly recommend it for that. And last is Third Seal. Again, blindness for some reason does not show the survivor's Springtrap's aura when he's revealed with the cam. While this does not happen very often, if it does, getting them blind means that you don't have to worry about them knowing exactly where you are. And while Third Seal is a Hex, the blindness can actually help you out in other ways, such as making it take longer to find people that are on hook if people aren't paying attention, hiding your Hexes. You can combo this with some other things as well, like I said, like Mindbreaker. So in general, okay-ish. So, in general, my thoughts on these are Devour Hope is a thumbs up, Ruin is a thumbs up, and Third Seal is a middle of the ground, thumbs in the middle. Next up is Doctor, a travesty of one of these perks, which is Monitor and Abuse, which we'll get to in a second. But we have Monitor, Overcharge, and Overwhelming Presence. So I'm going to talk about Monitor first, because this is... Look how they massacred my boy. So, before the change of the Krasue coming to Dead by Daylight, Monitor Abuse was a base amount. It was 8 meters, like, both ways, which was cool and great. And then they changed it to percentage base, which means that the killers that were running it, which were killers with lower terror radius, now can't run it, because it doesn't do anything for them, because the lower your terror radius is, the less the percentage shaves off. Hooray. But what should be mentioned with this is even back when it was 8 meters, while it could be useful in Springtrap to bring his 24 meters lower, this really wasn't necessary because of the doors, for one, and for two, you can get undetectable when you basically want if you're not running Bonnie's guitar. Even if you're running Bonnie's guitar strings, having a lower terror radius wasn't that big of a deal because you were coming out of the door right at the gin anyways, so who really cares? I don't recommend it, especially after it's changed. Maybe I'm missing something, but yeah. Overcharge. Springtrap is very, very proficient at kicking gens. It's one of the best things he can do. So you would think Overcharge is pretty good. Honestly, it is. Just not on its own. It's one of the biggest problems with Overcharge. It's 85% regression to 130% regression over the next 30 seconds. So it's okay. Don't worry about the skill check thing. That depends on the survivors you're going against. It's okay if you're running it in a kick build. Combo with Call of Brine or even Pop, and you'd be surprised how much value you can get from it. But on its own, not really that great. The information is okay, but yeah. And last is Overwhelming Presence. This perk recently got reworked to make it so when someone is exhausted within 32 meters of you, you see their aura. Also, if a survivor uses an item within those 32 meters, they also trigger it for 15 seconds as being exhausted. You can combo this with Chica's Bib. I don't think it's worth it because you get the Killer Instinct anyways. But, you know, something you can do. Comboing it with Languid Touch or even Genetic Limits like I often do can give you some pretty good follow-up hits, but I don't think it's really worth running it for that. There's many other better aura perks and better exhaustion perks in general. So for Doctors, Adepts, Monitor Abuse gets the thumbs down, Overcharge gets right in the middle, and so does Overwhelming Presence right in the middle. Next, we move on to Huntress, who is infamous for having some pretty bad perks, and honestly, I can't agree more, but still got to talk about him. Beast of Prey is probably the one that is the most kind of useful in Springtrap, but not really. If you hit Bloodlust, you get 40 seconds of Undetectable. Now, on some killers, this can be okay. I still wouldn't recommend it, because ideally you wouldn't want to hit Bloodlust, and depending on your killer, you won't, so it doesn't really matter. But Springtrap also has these things called security doors that you can go in and get undetectable for 20 seconds. So if you're going to drop a chase after you get Bloodlust, just go into a door anyways. There are some very niche situations this can do something for you, but it's not worth running in general. Next is probably the worst hex in the game of Hex Huntress Lullaby, which, for those that don't know, it increases the progress penalty of failed skill checks by 6%. And every time you hook somebody, you get a token, and for every token, it makes the sound cue for when a skill check pops up take longer. And once it's at 5 tokens, the sound cue doesn't happen altogether. I call this the 3 a.m. streamer perk, because it's usually the only people it really affects. That's not entirely true, but there are many better hexes to run, and getting it to those 5 stacks, while it can be fun in like an impossible skill check build, Springtrap doesn't really have that, so I don't think it's worth it at all. And last is Territorial Imperative, which every time I talk about this perk, I swear, I can't get over how bad it is for so many reasons. Territorial Imperative makes it so that whenever a survivor enters the basement while you are further than 24 meters away, their aura is revealed for 6 seconds, it then has a cooldown of 45 seconds. The litany of problems with this perk. 1, the 24 meter requirement, while I understand why it's there, is really dumb, because if you're a killer who doesn't have mobility, you're not getting to the basement in time anyways. 2, the fact that it has a cooldown is kind of ridiculous. I feel like if someone goes in and out of basement, it should keep going, and it would be nice to know if 2 people went down there and not just the 1. And 3, the fact that the aura read is only 6 seconds with the cooldown makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't understand why it's only 6 seconds when they go down. Yes, most of the time when someone goes into basement is to unhook somebody, so they're not going to be down there for long. But with how situationally niche this perk is, I don't understand why it has a limit. I kind of do. Normally, when behavior does this, the reason why they give like the aura read a limit is because of the perk tiers. But there's 2 other numbers that can be adjusted with the range and the cooldown, so I honestly don't know why it has that in the first place. But in general, Territorial Imperative, Huntress Lullaby, and Beast of Prey all get thumbs downs. There's just don't run them on Springtrap. So Bubba's an interesting one with Barbecue and Chili, Franklin's Demise, and Knockouts. 2 of these being very powerful on Springtrap, and the other one being okay in combination with some other stuff. So Barbecue and Chili, you get the aura read of anyone outside of 40 meters when you hook somebody for 5 seconds. This goes up to 7 with Lethal Pursuer. Springtrap has his door system, so having aura reading at long range can be very good. The only issue Barbecue and Chili does have is the hook requirement and the fact that they're within range of that 40 meters, you won't get the aura read. But there's some other things you can do to compensate for that. In general, it's actually really good. I've mentioned this in a couple videos. I feel like the base kits anti-tunnel changes they made a little while ago in the PTB to the base kit Pop Goes the Weasel and Barbecue and Chili were built in mind with Springtrap there, because this perk synergizes so well with him, but he has so many other better things, and Friends to the End kind of does the job of Barbecue for you almost better, especially with some particular builds. It's not that I don't recommend it, it's just there are better options. Franklin's Demise, whenever you basic attack a survivor, they drop their item, and the lost item's aura is revealed within 64 meters. With the nerf it got recently, I don't want to call it necessarily, it was a nerf, but it was, to behavior's eyes, it was a change. It's still okay. If you get someone to drop the item like a medkit at the beginning of a match or even a toolbox, they still have to go out and get it, so it has some little bit of slowdown there. It's, again, not nearly as good as it used to be, but it still has its purpose. The problem is Springtrap does have his axe, so if you don't M1 them or grab them after they hit the axe embedded in them, they won't drop the item. So while it can work, especially if you force it, it's not really something I would recommend. I know I know a much bigger creator than me would recommend it, but I'm still not the biggest fan of it. If you're comboing with something like Weave Attunement, go for it. But as always, that's a personal preference thing. In general, though, I don't think it's that good on Springtrap. Last is Knockout, and this is an interesting one. If you are running Indo CPU, do not run Knockout. The reason being is Knockout makes it so that when the survivor pre-drops a pallet, or not, okay, let me rephrase that. When a survivor drops a pallet, if they move away from 6 meters from the pallet within 6 seconds of dropping it, they get hindered for 5 seconds by 5%. This will help you catch up about 1 second faster or so. The problem Knockout has is that 6-second time, because if you break the pallet before they enter the 6 meter range or outside of that 6 meter time, they will not get the hinder. However, a lot of survivors will stay at a loop of Springtrap when he is, in the middle of the pallet, because he can't really do much until he has his axe back once the pallet is down. So it can help you in those situations, as well as if you happen to have your axe when the pallet gets dropped, the hinder can make it so your shot might be easier to land because they can't dodge it as fast. But there's a lot of niche situations with this. And if you're running into CPU with this, you're not going to get as much value because of how fast you're breaking the pallet. So in general, Barbecue and Chili gets a thumbs up, Franklin's Demise gets a thumbs down, and Knockout gets a middle of the road, just depends. Next we have Mr. Kruger, Freddy, Fredward, whatever you want to call him. Knife hands, man. With all of the in-game perks of Blood Warden, Fire Up, and Remember Me. Before we get into any of these, I do want to bring up Loot Bag, as I usually do. Loot Bag is a really good in-game add-on if used in the right situations that stops survivors from leaving if they have an axe in them and anyone within range. Comboing this with Blood Warden can be a very powerful effect, as it lets you set up this effect even if someone is in the exit gate. It does have problems as it banks on the in-game happening, and if you're doing your job right, you don't want it to go to in-game anyways, but it's still pretty decently good. Blood Warden can allow for a lot of situations where you can make a comeback that you normally wouldn't have without it. And if, depending on what the timer is at, it almost guarantees a win pretty much. Next is Fire Up. Every time a gen is done, you get a token, up to 5 tokens. You get 6% break speed up to a max of 30% on walls, pallets, generators, and vaulting windows. This is an interesting one. Springtrap will lose a lot of gens, and he can't really pressure even with specific builds. So I don't think it's necessarily worthless, and being able to vault faster can be very, very helpful, and Obviously, a lot of palettes can mess him up, so having this can be good. However, as I say a lot of the times, Indo CPU exists, and that's the biggest problem with running Fire Up. If you're going for a full-on break build, like during the Halloween event with the break speed and things like that, yes, it can be very, very funny and very good in a lot of situations. But in general, if you want something for the vault, just bring Bamboozle. We'll get to that when we get to Clown, but it's just better in almost every way. Last is Remember Me. Obsession perk, hit the Obsession up to 5 tokens. Every token, everyone who's not the Obsession opens the gate slower. It's good, but also not really. The problem with this perk is if the Obsession happens to open the door, then it's not doing anything for you. The other problem with this perk is that, again, much like every other in-game perk, ideally you don't want to get to this point. It's good insurance if you do, but in general, Springtrap has other ways of dealing with this, and the perk No Way Out is more consistent and typically better at this job. So, Freddy's perks in general, Blood Warden gets a thumbs in the middle, Fire Up gets a thumbs in the middle, and Remember Me, as much as I hate to say it, also gets a thumbs in the middle. All these are pretty middling, and they're situational at best, and that's the biggest problem with in-game perks. Amanda Young or the Pig, and I'm going to get a lot of beef for this one. We got Make Your Choice, Hangman's Trick, and Surveillance. I'm going to talk about Make Your Choice and Surveillance before we talk about Hangman's Trick, because I got some stuff to say about that perk. Make Your Choice. This is actually pretty decent on Springtrap. Whenever the survivor is unhooked when you are outside of 32 meters, the unhooker screams and is exposed for 60 seconds. Should be noted, this exposed timer is affected by Vigil. Just use that at your own discretion. The reason why this is actually pretty decent on Springtrap is because, again, the doors. If you combo this with something like Agitation and make sure the hook survivor is next to a door, you can completely interrupt their heal, make them have to run and start pre-dropping to get rid of a lot of resources earlier into the match, and honestly, if you don't have your axe on you or are running something like Foxy's Hook, you can make it so that you are almost guaranteeing this exposed hit with the M1, which can be very powerful and lead to a lot of snowball situations. I have an entire build based around Make Your Choice on Springtrap, and very similar to how I use it on Dredge, which I've talked about in the past, it does have its use cases, and I think people do overlook it a little bit because of that, which is going to be the common theme of Amanda's perks. Next is Surveillance. Basically, when you kick a gen, its aura, when it starts regressing, it has a different aura. When someone starts working on it, it also has a different aura. This effect lasts for 16 seconds, after which the generator returns to its aura by default. And it also makes it so you can hear gens 8 meters farther. Don't worry about too much about that because of how sound occlusion works. That's something that's finicky at best and doesn't work at worst. It's an okay perk. If you combo it with something like Oppression, or if you're kicking a lot, or even something like Ruin, Surveillance is surprisingly good information. The only problem Surveillance has is comboing it with certain things like, obviously, Bonnie's guitar strings, because if you're running Bonnie's guitar, Surveillance is going to overlap with the aura read. Also, if you're comboing with something like Call of Brine, it can also mess up how the aura reading works because the generator will be in yellow. So use it at your own discretion, but not a bad perk by any means. Again, if you combo it with something like Oppression as well, which is something I really, really enjoy doing, you can get reading on a lot of gens and know exactly which ones are being worked on, which is kind of nice. Last is Hangman's Trick. This perk has gone through the frickin' ringer. Sorry, YouTube, I wanted to cuss and then I caught myself. So this perk... So let me tell you what it does now, because this perk has gone from... It's been reworked, I believe, 3 times now, and it is now been buffed about 3 times as well since it's changed to a Scourgehook. When you are carrying a survivor, anyone within 16 meters of a Scourgehook has their aura revealed to you. It also triggers a lot of noise notification at the location of that hook if someone is sabotaging it. Don't worry too much about that part. But the 16-meter aura range for Scourgehooks, this was a recent buff, and honestly, I've used this perk in a lot of randomizer builds and when I was doing the Pig Adept, and I'm not going to lie, I think people are sleeping on how good this information could be. I know what some people are thinking, combo with Jagged. Yes, that can be very good, comboing with Jagged. However, much like Discordance, I think people are also missing the fact that if you don't see any auras while you're carrying someone, that means you know where people aren't, which, depending on where the hook is, can be very valuable information. If you see a gen across the way and there's a hook right beside it with it's a Scourge hook and you don't see auras, you know no one's on that gen. You know you don't have to go over there. But honestly, I'm going to try to put in the background some of the situations where Hangman's Trick actually got me use. Every time I run this perk, whether it's for randomizer builds because someone wants me to or because I'm just bored and trying it out, it genuinely always gets some form of value. And not like situational value, but like genuine value, even with the RNG of hooks. So I think, I'm not going to sit here and say that Hangman's Trick is like some amazing perk that people are sleeping on, but I do think people do crap on this perk way more than it deserves it, especially with the range buff. So in general, Make Your Choice gets a thumbs up, Hangman's Trick gets a thumbs up, and Surveillance gets a middle of the road, depending. But on a good day, I'd give it a thumbs up. Ah, Clown. When I got the Clown Adept, I was genuinely salivating because he has 2 of Springtrap's core perks, which are Bamboozle and Pop Goes the Weasel, and one that's just kind of funny on him. So let's talk about him. Bamboozle, a perk in the past I have often said is basically required on Springtrap. This isn't true when I say required. I'm being a little hyperbolic with that. But what should be noted is that a lot of loop Springtrap can't play very well without Bamboozle. Shutting off the window can cut your chase time in like half. I've mentioned before that Shack is like a 50-50 depending on the situation. With Bamboozle, you just in that 50-50 in like 5 seconds. So rather than it taking 15 seconds, you're like, it's just a very, very good perk. Plus, vaulting faster is never a bad thing. Chlorophobia is harder to nail down. I've never liked this perk, mostly because the effect it has can't really be seen or felt by the killer unless people are failing the skill check. Springtrap has a small terror radius as is at 24 meters, and he's undetectable when he comes out of a door unless he's running Bonnies. So I really don't think it's worth running in general, even in an anti-heal build. And before someone says it, what about Iridescent Coin with the terror radius on the axe? The terror radius on the axe does not apply effects from terror radius perks. We don't know if this is intentional. We're pretty sure it is. So just keep that in mind that you can't run it for that purpose either. Last is Pop Goes the Weasel, arguably one of Springtrap's best perks. Now, I know some will say Pain Res and all of this stuff, but I think Pop is the most consistent of them all. And Springtrap, especially with, again, Bonnie's guitar strings, knows exactly which gen to go to use Pop on. And that 20% progress from, 20% current progress regression can mean the difference between a win or a loss. And the 45 seconds doesn't really affect him too much, again, since he can pop right up next to the gen he needs to. But in general, Bamboozle gets a thumbs up, Pop Goes the Weasel gets a thumbs up, and Chlorophobia gets a thumbs down just because of its anti-synergy. Next up is Spirit, who is a weird one because it's a Hex, an in-game perk, and a perk that only really works when it's comboed with another perk. So, Hex on the grounds. Springtrap can make use of Expose, like I said, in the Make Your Choice part with Pig, but in general, unless you're bringing this with other Hexes, and even then, you have to hope the survivors actually, cleanse the totem to get this effect. But if it does get you one down in general, that is considered value from the perk. So I won't say don't run it, but if you're running it with a Hex build, it's usually better just to run Undying or Dominance or even Thrill of the Hunt to protect your Hexes rather than Haunted Grounds to punish people doing your Hexes. Something mean you can do that a lot of people don't bring up, you can combo this with Undying, which is really funny because you can get it to go off twice. Anyways, next is Rancor. At the end of the match, the Obsession is revealed to you for 3 seconds, and you will then be able to kill them at the end of the trial. They are also exposed the entire time. Again, another exposed perk. In-game is pretty good for Springtrap. The one problem with this is if you're running Loot Bag, I wouldn't recommend running Rancor with it, as while the exposed effect can work, a lot of times you're going to grab the Obsession or whoever has the axe in them anyways, so you actually don't want to down them normally, because once they are downed, they can just crawl out of the gate. So just be aware of that. Again, though, don't think it's really worth running. There's some funny challenges you can do with this, but in general, not that great. And last is Spirit Fury, which is an interesting perk. When you break 2 pallets, the next pallet that is slammed on your face or that stuns you will break instantly. You will still be stunned, this should be mentioned, which is why it's usually comboed with Enduring. And if it's not comboed with Enduring, it's not that great. It's not terrible, but it's not that good. It can save you some time, and people will not see it coming even without Enduring. But once they see this activated once, they will start pre-dropping almost every pallet. Just be aware of that. On its own, don't think it's worth it. And besides which, Springtrap has a lot of options to deal with pallets. Again, like Endo CPU, bringing Brutal Strength might be better. And Enduring on its own, I feel, is actually better than Spirit Fury. So Hex on the ground gets middle of the road. Rancor gets a thumbs down, and Spirit Fury, if we're considering on its own, thumbs down. If we're considering it with Enduring, thumbs up. It really just depends. Legion with Discordance, Iron Maiden, and Mad Grit. I'm going to talk about Iron Maiden and Mad Grit first, then we'll go to Discordance. Iron Maiden is just not that great. The information can go off more often than you realize it does, especially if you run it for a few matches. You'd be surprised how often survivors actually go into lockers. And the exposed effect can be nice, but unlike killers like Blight and Bubba and Chucky, survivors won't really run into a locker to dodge the axe. They'll just, move out of the way. So it can't really help you in situations like that like it can for some other killers. So I don't really think it's worth it. And opening lockers faster is not that great. Honestly, if you really want to do that, just run Forever Entwined, which we'll get to later because it makes locker grabs faster as well. Next is Mad Grit. If you're doing backpack builds, sure. Springtrap can't really do too much with backpack builds, but it's an option you have. So hooray. And last is Discordance, which is probably the best of the bunch and one of the best perks on Springtrap. If you don't feel like running Bonnie's Guitar Strings, Discordance is a amazing counterpart rather than it, as the effect can basically just tell you exactly where to go, especially at the start of the match when survivors do tend to get on the same gen, or the end of the match where survivors also tend to be on the same gen and stacking there. In general, the information is always good. I run this in my slugging Springtrap builds as well because it's information that these survivors don't even know you have. They have no way of knowing this. Unlike something like Access Panel or Bonnie's Guitar Strings. Bonnie's Guitar Strings, they see you don't have undetectability when you come out of a door, so they know you have it. And if you're running Access Panel and throw your axe through a door, then they also know you have it. This has no tell to the survivors that it is in play. They might pick up on it if you constantly go to a gen that is yellow all the time, but again, they really have no actual way to know what's happening. So Discordance gets a thumbs up. Iron Maiden and Mad Grit both get thumbs downs. Next is Adir's Plague. I can hear Meiji shaking in his boots. Plague has arguably some of the best teachables in the entire game. Just from 2 of the 3 being good, because they're just that good. So we'll start with the worst one, which is Dark Devotion, which ironically is not that bad on Springtrap. So something that should be noted with Dark Devotion, is that the Obsession does not have to be injured by a basic attack. It's for any reason, and for the next 45 seconds, they get a 40-meter terror radius. That also needs to be noted. Even though Springtrap has a 24-meter terror radius, Dark Devotion will still be 40 meters on the survivor. It does not take place of your current. It just makes it 40 meters. This was to bring it more in line with Hillbilly, Kaneki, and I believe Nurse. So the 40 meters are more consistent on those killers. And the undetectable status effect lasts for those entire 45 seconds, which can be useful, especially if you combo with something like Iridescent Coin or Security Badge, and you can just constantly say undetectable for a lot of the match if you find your Obsession early, and even if you down the Obsession. Again, Springtrap being undetectable is not the greatest thing in the world because he is still loud in chase, but removing your red stain is never, ever a bad thing, and it should be noted that this can lead to a lot of downs that you probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So, yeah, it can be good. And the fact that it works on axe hits as well is just a bonus. Next is Infectious Fright. Infectious Fright makes it so when you down a survivor, everyone within your terror radius screams, and their location is revealed to you for 6 seconds. Now, the thing with this is Springtrap has a 24-meter terror radius. So, technically, it's better than it is on most killers. While you don't get as much information as most killers, because your terror radius is smaller, you can capitalize on that info more. The problem is that if you're not running Bonnie's Guitar Strings, a lot of times you might be undetectable when you get the down, which does mean that Infectious will not go off. So something I do often do if I am going to run Infectious Fright is run it with Bonnie's. That way I make sure I never have my terror radius for this to be able to go off. You can also combo this with other things like Phantom Fear as well to give you the same general effect. But it's just a decent snowballing perk, especially to help you with flashlight saves and things like this. So it can help you, again, just snowball the game into a position where you're better off. It's never bad to run. Again, I would highly recommend running it with Bonnie's, not because of Bonnie's strength necessarily, but because of the fact that it removes your terror, or doesn't remove your terror radius. Last is Corrupt Intervention, which at the start of the trial, the 3 farthest gens located from you, that should be noted from you, are blocked for 120 seconds. That's 2 minutes. This blocking stops when someone is put into the dying state. Springtrap's chases are not very fast, especially at the beginning of the match. He is a very slow start killer, And while the conventional knowledge might stay, well, he can just teleport across the map. He doesn't really need the early game pressure. This basically just stops survivors for a little bit and can save you about 20 seconds on gen time at the beginning of the match. And while I do think Lethal Pursuer is more consistent than Corrupt Intervention, which we'll get to later once we get to Nemesis, Corrupt Intervention is never a bad perk. If you're having a rough start, this is good insurance to make sure that rough start is not that bad. It gives you the liberty of also doing a bit of hit and run for those first 2 minutes, which can again lead to more of a snowball later down the line. I highly recommend using Corrupt if you are struggling with those early game pops, and just in general, it's a good perk. So Corrupt Intervention gets a thumbs up, Dark Devotion gets a thumbs up, and even Infectious Fright gets a thumbs up if you're running it with the right build. I recommend all the Plagues perks, and again, whenever people ask me which killer to level up at the start of the game, she's one of the few that I always say yes. Her, Clown, and Artist. Next up is Ghostface with Furtive Chase, I'm All Ears, and Thrilling Tremors. I'm All Ears, a very, very good aura perk, especially since it's buffed recently. The problem with I'm All Ears is that you can just run Purple Guy Drawing and get a very similar effect. However, it should be noted that this works anytime they do a rushed action. It does not have to be with an axe in them, and you can use that aura reading to land an axe hit or do some funny mind games with Springtrap sometimes. So, it's okay. The 30-second cooldown is a little annoying, but you can play around it oftentimes. And there are those moments when the survivor will use Life, and you'll just see them run away, which, depending on the loop, can actually be very useful to know if you should keep mind gaming the loop you're at or just chase them. Furtive Chase. I run this in my no-stop Springtrap build, which we'll get into later on in the future with a build video going over a lot of the builds I use. Whenever you hook the Obsession, you gain Undetectable and 10% haste for 18 seconds. This can be very, very good in certain situations, and also means that you don't have to focus so much of going through your doors, and can just lead to a lot of... It can lead to a lot of situations where you hook someone and then you can move immediately onto your next target, especially combo with some other perks, which is actually something Furtive has going for it in droves. This perk combos with a lot of other perks. A particular favorite of mine is comboing it with Friends Till the End, because of the Obsession getting the aura revealed as well as the exposed effect. And on top of that, it also combos very well with Make Your Choice, as you don't have to worry about the Scream, as the unhooker becomes the Obsession, so you know exactly who is exposed in the next 60 seconds. And again, just haste perks in general. Combo's really good with Devour Hope, as well as the 5% haste from Devour also goes on top of the 10% from Furtive Chase. Last is Thrilling Tremors. This is honestly one of the most slept on information perks in the game. So many people talk about its ability to block gens. That's not what you really want to focus on with Thrilling Tremors. That is cool, but not its main purpose. Its main purpose is knowing which gen isn't being worked on. The problem Thrilling Tremors has in Springtrap in particular is that it just does Bonnie's job at worse. So, as always, the biggest problem with Springtrap in general. But, you know, you can grab someone, pick them up, see which gen's being worked on, hop into a door, go over there and pop it. And, again, comboed with a lot of gen kick perks or even slowdown perks, it lets you know where to go. And it is also uncounterable information. The only thing the survivors can do to counter this is not work on the gen, but then the gen gets blocked. So they can't work on it anyways for the next 16 seconds. So who's really losing in that situation? Depends on items and such, but still. I think it's overall a good perk, and honestly, I don't say this about a lot of these, but I really do think it is actually a slept-on perk, especially for information. So Furtive Chase gets a thumbs up, I'm All Ears gets a thumbs up, and Thrilling Tremors also gets a thumbs up. Alright, next we have the Demogorgon with Cruel Limits, Mindbreaker, and Surge. I'm going to talk about Surge first, because I see a lot of people running this on Springtrap. So, as I mentioned in the past before, Springtrap is an M1 killer who happens to M2. This should be noted that Surge can be very useful for this. It is a very relaxed build. However, Surge is only 8%, and depending on the map, can be one of the best perks you ever run, or completely useless. It should also be noted that the survivors can hop in lockers to avoid Surge going off, go into an area where the gens aren't there, so it also doesn't get its effect as much. So it does have a lot of counterplay on the survivor side, but in general, it is still a good perk. And Springtrap does down with his M1 way more than people realize, especially if you're not running a build specifically designed around getting the grabs. So I don't think it's bad to run this perk, but I do think there are better options. Next is Mindbreaker, arguably one of Springtrap's most popular and staple perks. While the survivor is working on a generator, they are blinded and exhausted for 5 seconds once they stop. This also leads into the effect. The blindness is really good because when people see you in a camera. They don't get your aura for some reason while they're blinded. And the Exhausted is really good to stop pre-running when Springtrap comes out of a door. I will say that survivors can still play around this if they just slightly pre-run a little bit earlier than expected and just wait those 5 seconds out, or have Vigil. The 5 seconds doesn't last nearly as long as you would think it would. So it should be noted there. I think people do over-rely and oversell how good this is on Springtrap. I don't typically run it too often, but it can be good, and it is the only perk in the game. It's not even perk. It's one of the few things in the entire game that quote-unquote counters Sprint Burst. So that does need to be noted and can help you out in a lot of your matches to stop that issue of Sprint Burst, basically making your chase an extra 10 seconds or whatever just at the start of the match. Next, we have Cruel Limits, which once a generator is completed, it blocks all windows for 30 seconds. You see the auras of these windows in yellow. This perk is surprisingly good. I have an entire build around this perk with Iridescent Remnant, but in general, one of Springtrap's biggest issues can be windows a lot of times, and survivors never see this coming. And they're basically punishing them for doing gens too fast or not thinking about where their teammate is once the gen is completed. The amount of downs I've gotten from this is kind of ridiculous because, again, no one ever sees this coming, and it can completely ruin their entire game plan, especially on a map like Larry's, where it's 95% windows. But it can be unreliable as you have no control of when it goes off. But when in those situations where it does, it can be very, very, very punishing on the survivor end, and it has won me a few games running it. That being said, Cruel Limits gets a middle thumbs, Mindbreaker gets a thumbs up, and Surge gets a middle thumbs. Next up is Oni with Blood Echo, Nemesis, and Zancian Tactics. So let's talk about Zancian first. Zancian shows you the auras of all pallets and windows within 32 meters, and whenever a survivor drops a pallet, you will see their aura for 5 seconds. This can be very good for not just orbitals, but in general, just the information it can give once the pallet is dropped. Springtrap has a lot of options once the pallet is dropped if he happens to have the axe in his hand. Now, that depends if the survivor waits until you throw it to drop it, but that's a whole different discussion. In general, though, it's probably one of Springtrap's best aura perks, because it's in a situation where he would want the aura, which is the problem a lot of aura has for him in general. Next is Nemesis, again, part of one of my favorite builds on Springtrap, and in general, one of my favorite killer builds that's been happening. Whenever someone stuns or blinds you, they become the Obsession. Whenever your Obsession swaps, they get Oblivious for 60 seconds, and their aura is revealed to you for 8 seconds. Again, combining this with Lethal Pursuer, that aura goes up to 10 seconds. The Oblivious isn't really that big of a deal unless you're dealing with Blast Mine. By the way, if you really struggle against Blast Mine for whatever reason, Nemesis is the perfect counter to it. But overall, apart from certain combos it has, Nemesis does fall into this. It falls into the camp of perks that are very good synergistically, but not very good on its own. I don't think it's a bad perk by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely needs some other things to help it out. Last is Blood Echo, causes all survivors in the injured states to suffer from exhausted and hemorrhage for 30 seconds. This perk has been nerfed, buffed, reworked, changed. A bunch of things has happened to this perk. In its current state, it is not the worst thing in the world. However, it should be noted that due to the fact that we were in a very strong healing meta at the moment, it is very difficult for survivors to remain injured, even if you're running things to keep them so. So, while not the worst effects in the world, 30 seconds of exhausted can matter. Then again, most of the people who are going to be affected by this are already on a gen, so they're probably not moving, and unless you can get to them in those 30 seconds. Again, you can combo with things like Mindbreaker and maybe have this go off more often, but I don't think it's worth running in general. But maybe you can get some use out of the hemorrhage for the tracking from the blood. That's really all I can say about it. So, for Oni, we got Blood Echo, thumbs down, Nemesis is middle of the road, and Zancian is a thumbs up. Next is the Deathslinger, who's probably had some of the biggest glow-ups of perks in the entire game, apart from maybe Skull Merchant, with Deadman Switch, Gearhead, and Hex Retribution. Hex Retribution is a very good perk to put into any Hex build, as anytime the survivors are working on a Hex, they are oblivious for 60 seconds, even once they stop, as well as the fact that once a Hex is cleansed, you see the aura of all survivors for 20 seconds. This has no range limit, and it just happens. 20 seconds of aura reading is never a bad thing. And again, if you're running something like Plaything with it, you can get this go off quite a bit. That being said, it does have one very big problem, and that's if this is the first Hex to go. If this is the first Hex to go, you only get those 20 seconds, which still isn't bad. and it can be very, very good for you, especially, again, Springtrap does make very good use of aura perks. But, again, unless you really want to lean into a Hex build, which I don't say is a bad thing on Springtrap, but it can be, Retribution's a good one to fit in there. I actually run this over Undying a lot of the times because I want the Hexes to be done, so you never know. Combining this with Haunted Grounds can also be very mean, even on Springtrap, who, yes, has an M2, but he can't M1. Next is Gearhead, arguably the best aura perk for Springtrap. Whenever you injure a survivor, for the next 30 seconds, whenever a survivor succeeds at a good skill check, you get their aura for 8 seconds. This can be very, very impactful and let you know exactly where to go, even in the middle of a chase, to go right through a door and see if the survivor is there. Following up on a lot of hits. While not the greatest aura or the most reliable, this is aura reading that Springtrap can actually do something with. Again, it has no range limit. As long as it's within those 30 seconds, you get the aura read. Last is Dead Man's Switch. Again, a perk that has gone through the ringer. Widely considered one of the best perks in the game to just okay at this point. Whenever a survivor, after hooking a survivor, it blocks the first generator and the survivor stops repairing for 35 seconds. That block gen is in white. So you can combo this with a few things like Phantom Fear and Bonnie's Guitar Strings, or even with something like Thrilling Tremors. On its own, blocking a gen for 35 seconds isn't the worst thing to happen for you, but it would be better oftentimes to just kick the gen with something like Pop, even if it's only at like 50% progress. Because it should be noted that once a gen is blocked, you can't regress it. And while it is only 35 seconds and you can work around that, comboing this with other perks like Pan Res can also be a very good thing, as it gets that regression instantly and then it blocks it. But there are other blocking perks. It does basically the same thing Deadlock does, except it works on the current gen. I don't say don't run it, but especially after its nerfs, it is definitely not as good as it was. But if you can make it work, you can make it work. So overall, Retribution gets a thumbs up, Gearhead gets a thumbs up, and Dead Man's Switch gets a middle thumb, but I'm leaning more towards thumbs up. Pyramid Head is up next with Deathbound, Force Penance, and Trail of Torment. Trail of Torment, like most undetectable perks, can be very good. Some will argue that Unforeseen does its job, but better. It should be noted that Trail of Torment has the potential to last longer, as well as it gives you information when the survivor starts working on the gen, because when you get that undetectable status effect, if the gen starts getting worked on, you lose it, so you know a survivor has touched the gen. The cooldown can be kind of annoying, but if you can work around it, it can be good. That being said, Undetectable is not the greatest thing on Springtrap, as many people have noted. Even after the sound changes, he is still decently loud. Next is Force Penance, which is just better off his phone. God, even in this video, I can crap on that add-on. Force Penance makes it so whenever a survivor takes a protection hit, they are broken for 80 seconds. In general, pretty good. What I will say is that until the in-game, typically people won't be taking protection hits for Springtrap, and even if they are, if you hit them with the axe, they're going to be broken anyways. This will make the broken status effect linger longer, so they can't just reset. If you definitely are fearful of body blocks, I do recommend bringing Force Penance, but as a general perk for Springtrap, not the best thing in the world. And then we have Deathbound. Deathbound is an interesting perk, because this perk has been changed, I want to say like 5 times at this point, but Behavior keeps trying to make this perk work, and I think they've succeeded, it's just people don't really like it. So Deathbound makes it so whenever a survivor finishes the healing action on another survivor for 1 health state, Deathbound activates. It causes the healer to scream or reveal their location. It causes the healer to suffer from Oblivious whenever they are farther than 4 meters from the other survivor. The healer sees the aura of the healed survivor when Deathbound is active. So don't worry about that last part. In fact, I didn't even know about that last part. It's how insignificant it tends to be. But the Oblivious status and the screaming are the big things here. This basically means that if a survivor heals, which survivors are doing a lot right now, they're getting punished for it. And if they don't stay right next to each other, they're getting even more punished for it. And Oblivious can be a very powerful effect, even on Springtrap. Yes, Game Sense can make it so it's not nearly as good as it can be, but you will be surprised how often you can land up getting hits on survivors because they are Oblivious. And with Springtrap's doors, if you're running something like Bonnie's Guitar Strings, as I keep mentioning, Oblivious is a good way to circumvent the fact that you aren't getting your undetectability all the time. And this is one that the survivors are probably going to end up doing anyways, because again, all they have to do is heal, and this procs. So in general, Deathbound gets a thumbs up, Force Penance gets a middle, and Trail of Torment gets a thumbs up. Next up is Blight, and before we get into the perks, I do want to say something really funny. When we did the Blight Adept on Springtrap, it basically went like an actual Blight game. Someone DC'd like right at the start of the match, which was just a funny little anecdote. It was just like playing actual Blight. It was so much fun. So Blight has Dragon's Grip, Blood Favor, and Undying, the last two being Hexes. Dragon's Grip is an interesting perk. When you kick a gen, the gen is trapped for 30 seconds. What if a survivor is to touch that gen within the next 30 seconds, they scream and reveal their location for 4 seconds and are exposed for a minute. Dragon's Grip has a cooldown of 30 seconds. This perk has a lot of cooldowns, don't worry about it too much. Basically, if you kick a gen for the next 30 seconds, survivor touches it, they're exposed. Springtrap can make some decent use out of this. I wouldn't recommend it in general, as the idea of sneaking up on a survivor can be very difficult, because once Dragon's Grip hits, they're going to want to start running away. But if you're doing a fun gimmick build or want to get hits like right outside of coming out of a door, yeah, you can definitely get some use out of it. Blood Favor, on the other hand, is extremely powerful on a lot of killers, particularly ones that can almost guarantee a health state, cough, cough, Kaneki. But Springtrap could also make some pretty good use out of it as well. A lot of times survivors will wait until you throw your axe to drop the pallet. So what you can do is oftentimes throw the axe at them if they're in a bad position, and now they can't rely on the pallet to be their saving grace. The one problem Blood Favor has, okay, two problems it has, is one, it's a hex, so it can be cleansed, and two, and my biggest problem with it, is that this means that you are not destroying pallets by the end game. Once pallets start getting dropped and you start breaking them, even as Springtrap or any killer in general, survivors stop running out of resources and dead zones can be created. With Blood Favor, a lot of times you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Depends on the match, obviously, but if they don't cleanse the hex and you somehow run into a situation where you aren't able to get a hit very easily, this can backfire a lot. Last is Undying. Don't worry about the aura reading as much as I like to joke about the aura reading from this perk. Whenever a survivor goes near a dull totem, you will see their aura if they're within 4 meters of it. But the big thing with this is if another hex totem is cleansed or blessed, its hex is transferred to Hex Undying instead, and the totems and any of the tokens they have. Basically, if a hex is to be cleansed and Undying is up, Undying will be cleansed instead. The interesting thing about this perk is just its general synergy with most hexes. The one issue Undying has is that depending on the hexes you're running, you may or may not want this to happen. If you're running something like Plaything, it can be annoying, sure, but in general, we don't want to run Undying with it. Same with Pentimento, because it doesn't work with Pentimento. But Undying is just, in general, a good perk. Just if you're running a hex build, just it makes your hex last a little bit longer. It can still be cleansed itself, and a lot of times the survivors are cleansing totems really quickly. Undying basically only saves you a couple seconds, but you'd be surprised how often it can actually get the job done it needs to get done. Dragon's Grip gets a middle thumbs, Blood Favor gets a thumbs up, and Undying definitely gets a thumbs up. Alright, we got twins coming in with Coup de Grace. I know that's not how you pronounce it. Hoarder and Oppression. So, Coup de Grace makes it so that whenever a generator is completed, you gain 2 tokens to a max of 10 tokens. Which, I don't know why it says that, because you can only hold 5. That's... yeah, so you get a max of 10 tokens throughout the match, but you can only hold 5. Don't worry about that. It's weirdly worded. Increases when you will use a token, and you increase your next lunge by 80%, getting rid of the token. So basically, this makes your lunge almost doubled when you have a token. This can be very mean on certain loops, but a lot of the killers that enjoy using this are ones who can leverage this lunge in some way. Dredge is one, Hag is another. And there's a few others I can't think of off the top of my head, but those are probably the 2 biggest ones. Clown is another. If you're running this with Foxy's Hook, it can definitely be something that can be leveraged quite a bit. And it's not necessarily a bad perk. It's just not something Springtrap is like the most adept at using, is what I'm going to say. Plus, you're also limiting yourself to not being able to get axe grabs. While axe grabs are not like this end-all be-all thing on Springtrap, what I will say is that a lot of times they can counter certain things like flashlights if you need them to, as well as it is faster than picking someone up off the ground. So that should definitely be noted. Hoarder, whenever the survivor picks up an item, there's a loud noise notification for you. It also spawns 2 chests in the trial. This is okay information, but unless you're running it with Franklin's, which I don't even know why you would this instead of Weave, it's just not worth it. Hoarder, it kind of actually nerfs you a little bit. I need to definitely check into this, how it fully works, but especially with how they've changed how killer props work and things, I'm not 100% sure, but this actually probably affects how your doors spawn. Again, don't take my word on that 100%, but I just don't recommend Hoarder in general, but even if it affects that, I think it's just a pretty bad perk. Last is Oppression, a perk that has been slowly rising up in, I don't want to say use, but definitely in strength, and I think some people are sleeping on this perk. Whenever you kick a generator, randomly select up to 4 other generators that will also start regressing. This triggers a difficult skill check, and it has a cooldown of 35 seconds. A few things to note with Oppression is, don't worry about the skill check thing. That's just kind of there to be there. But a couple things to note is that the kick action, currently the way it works in the game is if you regress a gen by 5%, it activates a kick action on that gen. You get a max of 8 kick actions. Technically it's called a regression action, but just bear with me. The thing with Oppression that's really nice is that it actually avoids this. The gen you kick still gets the 1, but the other 4 gens don't. So in theory, this is the only perk in the game that can regress a gen outside of the gen kick limit that isn't something like Ruin. So that should definitely be noted. And it can be very useful, especially for later into the match when there are only 3 or 4 gens left to kick. Because you're going, even though it's a random selection, it's going to be all of those gens. Again, don't worry too much about the skill check part of it. I think people overlook how important that is to the perk, and especially with the cooldown reduction it got, and now that it's down to 35 seconds, you will constantly be using this pretty much anytime you're kicking a gen. Unless you're kicking them religiously, you will definitely get a lot of use out of it. So, Coup de Grace gets a thumbs down for me, Hoarder gets a thumbs down, and Oppression gets a thumbs up. Again, Springtrap is very good at kicking gens in general, and this makes him even better at that. K-pop star himself, Mr. Trickster's up next. We got Crowd Control, No Way Out, and Starstruck. Crowd Control, being a Hex, automatically kind of shoots it down a little bit, but for a Hex, it is very powerful. Can be very powerful. If Survivor Team knows what you're doing with this, they will ruin your day with it. It permanently blocks the last 5 windows that were rushed. Now, what I mean by this is if they're in a Swift and someone calls us out, they can just rush 5 windows on the other side of the map and block those instead. But this can save you some time, and instead of running Bamboozle, you can run this and stop some of Springtrap's harder loops to really play in. But what should be noted is, again, it is a Hex. Once it's cleansed, you don't have this. Running this in a general Hex build, it can be fun with something like Remnant, but it's not that good. I know I said but a lot with this one, but it's just there. In general, it would be better to just run Bamboozle, because a lot of times those are the only windows you need. But if a Survivor is holding W and just kind of, you know, space barring at every vault location they can and just keep going, this can kind of help with that a bit once they do decide to loop, but I'm not really too sure how much I can really say about Hex Crowd Control. No Way Out is an extremely good perk for in-game. Probably one of the best, if not the best, apart from maybe Blood Warden, but even that has its issues. Whenever you hook a Survivor, you get 1 token. It has to be unique Survivor. And for every token you have, it blocks the exit gates for 12 seconds. Up to a max of 60 seconds if you have all 4. So this basically just gives you a whole extra minute to work with in the in-game. Now, Springtrap already has Loot Bag for the in-game, so you can combo it with that for a very clear use case. And it will force the survivors to kind of want to open the gates. But, as most people will tell you, a lot of times your idea is not to get to in-game if you can help it. But if you're someone who does want to bank on that as an insurance policy, I definitely do recommend No Way Out. This perk is not bad, and the information it provides can also be good. If the hatch is closed and you have No Way Out, there's 1 survivor left, that's basically GG. You're getting your 4K. Last is Starstruck, and Starstruck is an interesting perk. Whenever you're carrying a survivor and a survivor enters your terror radius, they are exposed. This lingers for 30 seconds once they leave the terror radius. It has a 6-second cooldown, and this can be activated while you are carrying someone. So if it's on cooldown for, let's say it has 5 seconds left and you're carrying somebody, it will activate once the cooldown is up. Now, Springtrap and Exposed perks. I mentioned this with Make Your Choice and a few other ones. Can be good. Exposed perks are never bad. The issue Starstruck has with Springtrap is a few things. One is that sometimes he's undetectable when he is carrying a survivor, because maybe you pick them up right after you get out of the door or something like that, and this will still go on cooldown. The other thing is that even when he's not undetectable, his terror radius is smaller. Now, back in the day, Deathslinger liked this perk because his terror radius is smaller, and he could reel people in and get the M1 hit. Springtrap doesn't have that luxury. So while I don't think it's terrible, I don't recommend using it for its main use case. In certain niche situations or with a build around it, I can definitely see it, but overall, I don't think it is worth it. So Hex Crowd Control gets a middle thumbs, No Way Out gets a thumbs up, and Starstruck gets a middle thumbs. Nemesis coming in with Lethal Pursuer, Hysteria, and Eruption. Lethal Pursuer is, in my opinion, one of the best perks in the game. That's a little hyperbolic. It's not that good. It doesn't actually do too much. But the fact that it lets you basically start the match almost immediately by knowing where the survivors are for the next 11 seconds is very powerful. And again, Springtrap has a way to get right to them. I run this over Corrupt a lot of the times because I would rather have my early game start fast than have the insurance of it not going... rather than having the insurance of Corrupt. And it's also part of one of my favorite builds on Springtrap, and it synergizes really well with Aura perks because it adds those extra 2 seconds, and it synergizes very well with Purple Guy drawing. Lethal Pursuer is just really good on Springtrap. It just honestly is. It's really good in general, but on Springtrap in particular, he can make very good use out of this perk. Next is Hysteria. Whenever you injure a healthy survivor, causes all survivors in the injured state to become oblivious for 40 seconds. This does count towards the survivor you injure. This should be noted. It's not that big of a deal and doesn't come up in too many situations, but sometimes it can matter. It does have a cooldown of 40 seconds. Don't worry too much about that. But again, like I mentioned earlier with Oblivious, it can be good on Springtrap, but we're also in a healing meta, so a lot of people aren't going to stay injured. But if they happen to, you can get some cheeky hits with it, but I don't recommend it in general. Again, Springtrap can't like down people super duper fast a lot of the times, and while he can keep people injured and on their toes, Hysteria has its niche, but it's not that great. Last is Eruption. Again, it's a gen kicking perk. Whenever you kick a gen, it highlights it. You can do this for 3 gens. The next time a survivor enters the dying state by any means, this includes plot twist by the way, the gen instantly loses 10% of its maximum potential progress. And anyone working on those gens has their aura revealed for 12 seconds, has a cooldown of 30 seconds. Something to note with Eruption that people do get caught up on, you do not have to kick all 3 gens. Trust me, guys, you don't have to kick all 3 gens to get the most out of Eruption. Eruption is just a very good perk that basically gives you regression for downing people. If you happen to go across a gen and are able to kick it, and the next time you down someone, you get a little bit of reward for it. So basically all this perk is doing for you. Again, Springtrap is very good at kicking gens. I highly recommend Eruption on him. Plus, he can actually do something with that aura, unlike a lot of other killers. Once he gets that regression, he can hop in the door and get right over there. Maybe directly at the gen or to the door next to them where the survivors start running. So, in general, Eruption gets a thumbs up. Lethal Pursuer gets a thumbs up. Hysteria gets a middle thumbs. I should probably give it a thumbs down, but I've seen it work in enough situations where I can't justify doing that. Next is Artist, and we're skipping Pinhead because his perks are not general perks, so I'm going to talk about them in that section. But the Artist comes with Grim Embrace, Hex Pensamento, and Scourge Hook, Pain Resonance. The second Scourge Hook added to the video game. Grim Embrace makes it so that whenever you hook a survivor for the first time, you gain a token. When you release 16 meters away from the hook, for the first 3 tokens, it blocks all generators for 10 seconds. On the 4th one, it blocks them all for 40 seconds and gives you the aura of the obsession. Don't worry too much about the aura and the obsession. It's more of a icing on top kind of thing. It might come in handy, but don't worry about it too much. The blocking of the gens is the important part here. 10 seconds of aura block per survivor is 30 seconds overall, plus the 40 seconds from the last one, which means it's 70 seconds of blocking. If you're able to hook all the survivors at least one time, which isn't unheard of, this can be a very powerful perk to keep the game momentum going. The few things to note is the walking away from the hook thing. This does count going through a door, so you can definitely use that to leverage this a little bit, but a lot of times it would be faster to just walk away from it in general. And it also does mean that once the gens are blocked, the survivors won't be on them, which means that they're not as easy to find. So be very careful of that if you are using your doors to go straight to a gen to find survivors. But you can use other aura perks to kind of circumvent this. Again, Friends to the End will kind of do the same thing as the Obsession thing on the last one, but it might also mean that you can find the Obsession will switch when you hook the Obsession for the last one, so that's also to be noted, and then you'll get the aura reading on them from that. Next is Pentimento, a perk that a lot of people think is gutted. I understand where they're coming from with this, but I think Pentimento is still fine. I think people are just really overlooking what it can do and how to use it. So Pentimento, basically when a hex is cleansed, you can rekindle it, and when you get one rekindle totem up, healing and repairing progress is decreased by 20%, and for every extra one that is up, you get an extra 3% up to a max of 32%. This is a bunch of numbers, but basically what you need to know here is that as long as one of your Pentamentos is up, gens and healing are happening 20% slower. Now, it should also be noted that the survivors do get aura on the rekindled totems within 60 meters, so they can be a lot easier to see. And the way you want to use this, in my opinion, and from my testing, is you do not want to have more than one of these up at a time. Even if the survivors cleanse 4 totems, you want to wait until either all 5 are able to be lit to cause them to not be blocked. You want to wait for all 5 of them to be lit, causing none of them to be able to be cleansed, or you just want to have one up. Just one is enough. 20% off of healing and gen speeds is more than you think it does. That's not even considering the fact that they still have to cleanse the totem, which means one person's wasting their time with that. Which doesn't take the longest amount of time, but is still a little bit of slowdown in there, and can waste survivors' time more than you think, and give you just that little bit of extra time to start snowballing the game. But again, it does need to also be comboed with other hexes. Plaything is probably the most obvious combo, but there are other things. You can combo it with Wretched Fate. You can combo it with Retribution, Undying, Ruin, a lot of other things to basically make your games a little tiny bit slower as you are trying to navigate Springtrap. Last is Pain Res, and I don't really have too much to say about this perk that not everyone else has said, except for it's one of my least used perks. Pain Res is really powerful. Whenever you hook a survivor for the first time on a Scourge hook, that should be noted on a Scourge hook, instantly regress the generator with the most progress by 20% of its total progress. The survivor on the generator will scream. This doesn't trigger a noise notification. This is just good slowdown. You don't have to think about it too much. You just put a survivor on a Scourge hook, and 20% on the highest progress gen is gone. It's just good. I can't really say too much about it. The reason I don't run it personally is because, 1, I'm not the biggest fan of Scourge hooks because of RNG, and 2, I like to experiment a little bit more with other things, and I think Springtrap works a little bit better with a lot of other regression perks. Overall, all of them get thumbs up. Every single one of these. Pentimento is probably the only one where I'm a little lackadaisical on, but I still think it's a decent perk even after the nerfs it's received. But yeah. Next up is Onyro with Call of Brine, Merciless Storm, and Scourge Hook, Floods of Rage. Scourge Hook's Floods of Rage makes it so that whenever a survivor is unhooked from a Scourge Hook, you see the aura of all other survivors, so not the unhooked person. For 7 seconds, 9 seconds with Lethal Pursuer. Just a good perk. This has no range limit, which is probably the thing that saves it the most. If it had a range limit of some kind, it probably wouldn't be that good. But the fact that it doesn't have a range limit means that if you're in a chase with the survivor at the moment that it pops, it can be very, very beneficial. But at the same time, if you're not in a chase with a survivor and don't know where any of them are, this can help you reassess yourself and get your boundaries again. On top of this lets you know if you're running something like Make Your Choice, who to go after for the exposed hit. This perk has a lot of utility. The biggest issue it has, again, is that it is a Scourge Hook, but much like I didn't mention for Pain Res, is that you can combo this with Jagged Compass. Unlike Pain Res, this activates when they are unhooked, so Jagged Compass makes it so that any hook they're unhooked from will cause this to happen. So very good for situations like that. Next is Call of Brine, which makes it so that after performing a damage on a generator, so after you kick it, Call of Brine activates for 70 seconds, increases the regression to 150% of its default, so Ruin. Highlights it in yellow, and anytime a survivor triggers a loud noise notification whenever they succeed at a good skill check. It's good information. It's good slowdown, especially if you plan on staying in the area for a little bit. And in general, the big thing with this is the information. Don't worry too much about the regression. It is nice. The regression is nice. I'm not going to say it's not. It actually is really nice. But the fact that it gives you information on the generator is the biggest thing. It lets you know if you have to go back, if someone went back on the generator. And unlike something like Discordance, all they have to do is be doing skill checks, which they're going to be doing anyways. The one problem this perk has is if they are running hyper-focused stakeout. And the reason being is because while they are good skill checks, technically, the game is counting them as greats because of stakeout, and it will not trigger the noise notification. And you can also run something like Gearhead for a very similar effect. But if you're kicking gens or running a build like that, I definitely do recommend Call of Brine. Last is Merciless Storm, which is a harder one to assess. Springtrap can kind of make use out of this. If you pop it out of a door, if you know a gen is at 90% from something like Tinkerer, which I know is at 70%, but if you time it, blah, 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 you basically stop the survivors from finishing the gen because the skill checks don't get completed and then it's blocked for 20 seconds. However, this is very unreliable, and for the most part, you have a lot of other better options. Merciless Storm is just a pretty inconsistent perk. I don't like to call it bad necessarily because it's one of the... It literally did save the match I used it in. But you're also relying on the survivors to mess something up or for situations to be so specific that it will get it the use it needs to get. So overall, Call of Brine and Floods of Rage get a thumbs up and Merciless Storm gets a thumbs down for me. Dredge, the killer that basically made me want to make this entire video because I wanted to talk about Disillusion, but I couldn't think of an excuse to. So, Dredge has Darkness Revealed, Disillusion, and Septic Touch. We're going to talk about Disillusion last because I think it's the most interesting of the bunch. Septic Touch is bad. I'm not even going to sugarcoat this. Septic Touch is bad. Whenever a survivor performs a healing action while inside your terror radius, they suffer from blindness and exhausted status effects. This effect lingers for 30 seconds if they are interrupted by the healing action for any means. This perk has every problem that almost every bad perk in the game has. 1, you don't know what's going off. 2, you don't know if they have an exhaustion perk, so you don't even know if it did anything. 3, if you're playing a killer like Springtrap, your terror radius is small or non-existent, so it's not even working half of the time. And 4, and this is the biggest one, it gives no feedback whatsoever. Listen, this perk, I'm sure someone will tell me that they've gotten use out of it, and you probably have. I'm not saying you haven't. But the consistency of this perk is just not there. It's just not good. Behavior can nerf it or buff it, nerf it, change it all they want. It's never going to be good. If you want the same effect, just run genetic limits. We'll get to that later when we get to Singularity. But just run genetic limits or overwhelming presence and you'll get a very similar, more consistent effect. Or even languid touch. Darkness Revealed. Whenever you open a locker, the auras of survivors within 8 meters of any locker on the map are revealed for 8 seconds. This has a cooldown of 30 seconds. So, when you open a locker, blah, 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 get the aura reading on everyone on the map. On some maps, this can be very powerful, especially with the changes to the palettes they have done. They have added a lot more blockers on the map. That's probably the one good thing from the palette density update. But this is inconsistent and requires you to stop what you're doing and open a locker. It's not bad info. I'm not going to say it's bad info. And you can do something with this info, especially because of the doors. But it's sometimes not worth it, and you will waste a lot of time opening lockers. And again, it does rely a bit on how the map is placed, because if the map doesn't have that many lockers, this will not get that much of an effect. But if you enjoy aura reading, go for it. It's not like you're Huntress or Trickster. You're not opening lockers very often, but you never know. Last is Disillusion, and this is probably one of the most interesting things, because I thought this perk was trash on Springtrap. So, after 3 seconds of entering a survivor by any means, Disillusion activates for 20 seconds. Instantly breaks the next pallet of the survivor, performs a fast vault across while inside of your terror radius. So, the interesting thing about this perk is that it's the terror radius part that was interesting, and the reason why I thought it was bad. When the survivor has an axe in them, they are oblivious, which means that technically, as far as the game is concerned, they are not in your terror radius. This is weird because some things count and some things don't. Disillusion apparently considers them oblivious as not in your terror radius, just before someone makes that comment about Doctor. But yeah. That's why I thought it was bad, because if they have the axe in them and they vault a pallet, this won't activate. However, if you remove the axe the moment they start vaulting or in the middle of the animation, it does still activate. So, much like how Chucky uses this perk from time to time, Springtrap uses it in a very similar manner. Now, that 3-second slinger is the important part here, because once this axe is in a survivor, you have to wait 10 seconds to pull it out, or 8 seconds for them to pull it out. So what this basically means is that if you catch a survivor in a specific loop, like against a wall, you can basically keep them there until you are able to pull the axe back, chase them around until they need to vault, pull the axe out during the vault animation, and then M1 almost immediately after. Now, if they have life, this will ruin your day. Trust me, it has mine. But if they don't have life, it's basically a free hit, and they just got the axe out of them, so a free down. And with the maps having a lot more pallets, anything that can help you shred through pallets is always a good thing. Again, it is not the best thing in the world. I'm not going to sit here and say it, but it is a very interesting interaction that I didn't even think about until I started using it a little bit. And this is, again, why I wanted to kind of use every perk on Springtrap and test everything I could, because I was genuinely curious on how something like this worked. I found a way to not only make it work, but I found an interaction that I don't think I've seen anyone even talk about or mention. In general, though, Darkness Reveal gets a middle of the road, Septic Touch gets a thumbs down, Dissolution gets a thumbs up, just because of the interesting synergy it has. Okay, next up we have Wesker with Awakened Awareness, Superior Anatomy, and Terminus. So I'm going to talk about Terminus first because it has an interaction with Loot Bag that I think people should know about, which is that Loot Bag does not work with Terminus. Now, it can, because if you injure them, then they stay broken. But the thing with this is that with Loot Bag, they have to be healthy for the axe to embed. If the axe doesn't embed, they can still get out. This should be noted with that. Awakened Awareness, as with most killers in this perk, it's really nothing special, but it has its situational uses. Comboing it with Lethal Pursuer does increase the aura read to 2 seconds after you hook somebody, but Springtrap can't do too much with that information, considering it doesn't last very long, and it is only within 20 meters, so you have a lot of other perks that could help you out with this in general. Again, Friends of the Inn kind of power crept this a little bit, so did some other perks. And last is Superior Anatomy. This is probably the best of Wesker's perks. This makes it so that when the survivor does a rush vault action within 12 meters of you, Superior Anatomy activates, and next time you vault, you get increased vaulting speed of 40%. This does combo with Celebrate Poster's vault speed, so that should also be noted, and a very good way to utilize Celebrate Poster. And if you're going for a full build for grabs and whatnot, I actually highly recommend Superior Anatomy. You can hit someone with your axe before they go through a window, and then you can just vault it and immediately catch up, especially if you combo it with something like Unbound. So in general, Awakened Awareness gets a thumbs down, Superior Anatomy gets a thumbs up, Terminus gets a middle of the road. Next we have the Knight, who actually has a pretty good slew of perks for Springtrap, all things considered. Hexface, the Darkness, Hubris, and Nowhere to Hide. Nowhere to Hide is very obvious, as once you kick a gen, you get aura reading around you within a 24-meter radius for 5 seconds. This can be extended with Lethal Pursuer as always, and Springtrap is kicking gens a lot of the times, and his terror radius is exactly 24 meters, so if you aren't undetectable, you know if a survivor is in your terror radius while you're doing this. So it can be good, especially, again, comboing it with other gen kick perks. In general, Springtrap appreciates the information. It lets him know if he needs to stay in the area or if he needs to start leaving. Next is Hubris. Whenever you're stunned or blind, or whenever you're stunned by any means, it causes the survivor to be exposed for 30 seconds. It then goes on cooldown for 20 seconds. Not too great on Springtrap, but there are some funny things you can do with this, especially with Indo CPU and Foxy's hook. If you know you're going to get stunned at a loop, or if you think you're going to get stunned at a loop, or it's a very, like, in a dead zone kind of place, you can kind of throw your axe preemptively, break the pallet super fast with Indo CPU and Foxy's hook's haste, break the pallet after you get stunned with Hubris, and then immediately down the survivor. It doesn't always work, and it is definitely a gimmick, but it is something to note. And then Face the Darkness is interesting. This is a long read for people, but basically when you injure a survivor, a totem will light. As long as that survivor stays injured for every 25 seconds, if someone is outside of your terror radius, they will scream and reveal their aura for 2 seconds. It is random which survivor will do it. It's a little weird on how exactly it works, but basically injure a survivor, let them go, and then a hex will light and the other survivors will scream if they're outside of your terror radius. Something with Springtrap that's interesting with this is, 1, you're undetectable for a lot of the match because of your doors, and 2, because your terror radius is so small, a lot of times you can have people outside of your terror radius without you even trying. It can be good information to use, but it is also a hex, so that should be noted. As well as the fact that if the person you injured does happen to get down because you down them and complete the chase, the hex does unlight. This is both a blessing and a curse. 1, it gets rid of your information, but 2, it means the survivors can't cleanse the totem, so that should be noted. So Hexface the Darkness gets a thumbs up, Hubris gets a middle of the road, and Nowhere to Hide gets a definite thumbs up. Next up is the Skull Merchant, who has arguably had the biggest glow up on her perks than any other killer in the entire game, with the exception of maybe Deathslinger and arguably Ghostface. But these perks have gone from extremely worthless to probably some of the, like, they're just so good, especially one of them in particular. We have Game of Foot, Leverage, and Thwack. Now, Leverage has been nerfed, and it's the one I'm going to talk about first. Whenever a survivor is unhooked, they suffer... They basically, whenever a survivor unhooks somebody, they heal for 30% less for 60 seconds. So when someone unhooks a survivor, they heal slower. This is going to be fine to stop resets and things like that. I don't really recommend it, especially after the nerf, but if you're going for an anti-healing build, it can help with that, so it has its place. Next is Game of Foot. The survivor with the longest chase time that you hit with your basic attack will become the Obsession. When you're chasing the Obsession, if you perform a break action, so kicking a pallet, gen, etc., you gain a 7% haste for 10 seconds. Again, you can combo this with Hubris and Indo CPU and things like that to actually get some really funny plays, again, while you're breaking pallets. Springtrap has a lot of these that Indo CPU does combo well with, that can help him, like, just do these little funny interactions he has on certain loops with pallets. It's not the greatest effect in the world, but 7% haste is 7% haste. And depending on your build, you can kind of force who the Obsession is, whether it's Friends till the end, because you can tell exactly where the Obsession is with the aura read, or if it's Nemesis, if they stun you with the pallet, then they're automatically the Obsession, or even this, hit him with a basic attack, and if they were the longest chase person, then they too become the Obsession. So, yeah. Last is Thwack. You start the trial with 3 tokens. Whenever you break a breakable wall or a drop pallet, Thwack consumes 1 token and applies the following effects. Causes all survivors within 36 meters of your location to scream and reveal their auras for 6 seconds. I'm not going to say the part where Lethal Pursuer makes that 8 seconds, even though I just did. Whenever you hook a survivor, you get 1 token. So, basically, you get some tokens on Thwack whenever you break a pallet or a wall. Anyone within 36 meters will scream and show their aura to you. This is extremely good on Springtrap. Thwack is arguably one of his best perks, and one I don't use enough myself personally. The information you can get from this basically tells you if someone stayed at the loop, left the loop, if you can go for an orbital, if you need to hold your axe out once you get around the corner, if you need to stay in the loop and kind of work around them in some way like that. It's a very, very powerful perk that gives you information that Springtrap can use better than most killers. So in general, Game of Foot gets a middle, Leverage gets a thumbs down, and Thwack gets a massive, massive, massive thumbs up. Singularity is next with probably just perks that kind of complete builds, but doesn't mean they're necessarily bad. Force Hesitation, Genetic Limits, and Machine Learning. Machine Learning is the one I want to talk about first because it's a compromised gen perk, and Springtrap has one of these as well. Whenever you kick a gen, it becomes compromised, and it will be highlighted in yellow. Once the compromised gen is completed, for the next 45 seconds, you get the benefits of the compromised gen perks. For Machine Learning, that is Undetectability and 8% haste. Now, what should be noted here is that the issue that this has is you can't always control which gen is going to be completed. Even if you know one gen is farther along than the other, you don't know if that's the one that's going to be completed. On top of that, you don't always have the luxury of being able to kick exactly which gen you want. Sometimes you have to kick another gen, and then that will transfer the Machine Learning proc and the compromised gen to that one. So that's why I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it can be very hard to get the most use out of it. However, I will say if you get at least 1 or 2 uses out of it in a match, depending on how the outcome of the haste and the undetectability goes, it can definitely be worth it. This is one of those ones where I definitely say you need to think about this from your perspective, not necessarily think about how good it is meta-wise. Next is Force Hesitation. Whenever a survivor is put into the dying state by any means, Force Hesitation activates, and every survivor within 16 meters suffers from 20% hinder. It lasts for 10 seconds. So this is basically a slugging perk. However, it's also technically a tunnel perk. However, it's also technically a camping perk. So Force Hesitation is very, very good when survivors group up. And one of the best situations to find survivors grouping up is under a hook. And the reason why a lot of people say this is a very good tunnel perk is because once the survivor is downed, after they unhook somebody, that means the other person they just unhooked is now hindered by 10 or 20% for 10 seconds, making them that much easier to tunnel. So it can be very, very powerful in those situations. That's not even considering the fact that Springtrap is one of the best tunnelers in the game, or considering the fact that Springtrap doesn't even have to slug somebody to get this effect. He can just grab the axe out of them, pick them up, put them on his shoulder, and now they're 20% slower, which, if I'm doing my math right, means that they are slower than you when you're carrying somebody, because you're walking at, I believe it's 90% movement speed while you're carrying somebody. So you can use this for other plays like that. It does have a cooldown, but if you're going for a slug play style or really enjoy being mean to survivors coming for flashlight saves and like that, Force Hesitation is a great counter to that and can help you in a lot of those situations. Last is genetic limits. Whenever a survivor loses a health state by any means, they suffer from exhausted for 8 seconds. This is really, really good paired with your axe. It counters Dead Hard. It counters Lithe if you use it in the correct way. The only thing it doesn't really affect is Dramaturgy, because a lot of survivors will use it before the chase, and Sprint Burst for the same reason. The other thing this does not counter is Overcome. Overcome can hurt Springtrap a lot. Mostly because once they get hit with the axe, you're just 115 walking at them with no power, and they are meanwhile getting double the distance they normally would. Genetic Limits does not counter this. For some reason, I'm pretty sure it's intentional, but for some reason, Genetic Limits actually takes less priority than Overcomes. That should be noted. However, comboing this with certain builds, again, Celebrate Poster is one I always bring up. If you hit them with an axe before they vault the window, and you're running this with Superior Anatomy, you basically hit them with the axe, they have genetic limits that are exhausted, Superior Anatomy gets you through the window faster, and then Unbound makes you get the vaults or the haste as well from it, on top of the vault speed and haste from Celebrate Poster. So it can be very good comboed with that. But genetic limits I actually do think is a perk that a lot of people sleep on, but there's a reason for that. It's going to be because of a perk we're going to get to later. But in general, Force Hesitation gets a thumbs up, Genetic Limits gets a thumbs up, and Machine Learning gets a thumbs down. But at the end of the day, with Machine Learning, just remember it's more of a personal preference thing. Next up is the Xenomorph with Alien Instinct, Rapid Brutality, and Ultimate Weapon. Some of these are better than I think people give them credit for, and we'll get into why, especially on Springtrap. First is Rapid Brutality. Whenever you basic attack a survivor, you get 5% haste for 10 seconds. This does get rid of your ability to Bloodlust. Now, something that should be noted with Springtrap is that you a lot of times won't get Bloodlust unless you're purposely going out of your way not to use your axe for some reason. But there are some loops where you will get it. But Rapid Brutality can be very good comboed with Springtrap, as a lot of times you're not going to be able to get the axe hit depending on the loop. So you can use this to circumvent that a little bit and make your M1s just that little tiny bit stronger. Next is Ultimate Weapon, probably one that got quite the glow up recently by increasing the range to 40 meters. Whenever you open a locker, Ultimate Weapon triggers. Any survivors within 40 meters of the locker will scream and reveal their location. They're also blinded for 30 seconds. Blindness is an interesting thing on Springtrap because of the aura read from the cameras, but as well as in the current meta, especially with a lot of people running Windows of Opportunity still, you can use this to quote-unquote counter this. Again, making survivors blind doesn't always mean that they're not going to just know where things are. Windows of Opportunity is more of a convenience perk than anything else. That should be noted. But the information from Ultimate Weapon can still be very good. If you don't know where someone is, just open a locker. If they're not within 40 meters, then you know where to keep looking. And unlike something like Whispers, it's more of a pinpoint thing, with the downside of it having a cooldown and you having to go to a locker, obviously. Last is Alien Instinct. The aura of the farthest survivor from your current location who is injured is revealed for 8 seconds. They are also oblivious for 60 seconds. This perk would be very good on Springtrap, and it can be. The problem is the injury clause. Survivors aren't often injured very much. Even good survivors now, while sometimes they don't mind being injured, a lot of times they will try to heal up. And once they see that this perk is in play, they will definitely try to heal up as fast as possible. The information can be good. Springtrap loves Oblivious, and he can do a lot with aura reading, especially considering his doors can get him to the other side of the map very quickly. But, like I said, if the survivors aren't injured all the time, Springtrap can't really do hit and run very well, blah, blah, blah. A lot of factors into it. So, overall, Alien Instinct gets a middle thumbs, Rapid gets a middle thumbs, and Ultimate Weapon gets a thumbs up, in my mind. Next up, we got the frickin' good guy, known as Chucky or Charles Lee Ray, or my old main, with batteries included, Friends Till the End, and Hex 2 can play. want to talk about Hex 2 can play because it's probably the worst of the three by a long shot, but it is fun. Anytime you're stunned or blinded by a survivor for 2 times, a Hex will light, and anytime that you are stunned or blinded again, 2 can play activates and blinds all survivors who stun you for 1.5 seconds. This does not affect carried survivors, so it doesn't affect things like Decisive Strike. However, I kind of wish it did. This is an okay Hex. It's more annoying, and survivors will often go out of their way to cleanse it just because of that fact. It doesn't counter flashlight saves, but it can definitely slow them down and make them run into things. It's hilarious when it does work. And it's actually an interesting Hex because it's one of the few Hexes that can keep relighting. Once it is cleansed, you can get stunned 2 more times again, and it will light again and reactivate. The other thing that should be noted with 2 can play is that it activates on the second stun. So get stunned once, get stunned twice, and then they're blinded on that second stun. You don't have to wait for another one. If you see a flashlight squad, maybe think about bringing it. You'd be surprised how much value it can get. It can be good, or it can be funny combo with Hubris, obviously, and into CPU for sure. But really not that great of a perk to help you in your general chases and regression. Next is batteries included. When you're within 60 meters of a completed gen, you get 5% haste, and this lingers for 5 seconds. They recently increased the range, but lowered the duration of this one, which I think was actually a more beneficial change. Springtrap loves this perk. And one of the bigger reasons why is because when you go through a door, if you happen to pass by a gen, you still get this haste effect when you come out of a door. So it can be very good for that, as well as Springtrap is naturally slow because he's 110 movement speed. If you're in range of this, then you don't have to worry about throwing your axe to get that 115, and if you do throw your axe, then you're 120. So you can use the benefits you have from that. The one downside it has, obviously, is that if you are chasing a survivor where batteries included is being activated, you're chasing them in a place you probably don't want to be because there's no the gen there is done. But when it does activate in combo with in-game stuff, it can also be very good because it still activates on all the generators. So, yeah. Friends to the End, arguably the best aura reading perk in the game, and I will die on that hill. Whenever you hook a survivor that is not the Obsession, the Obsession's aura is revealed to you for 10 seconds. They suffer from the exposed status effect for 20 seconds. When you hook the Obsession, it causes a survivor to scream, random survivor, and they become the Obsession. This is, again, a perk I have in my brain off build for Springtrap and many killers because it's very easy to proc, and it always gives you some form of information. If it happens to be not the Obsession that you hook, then you know exactly where to go for the next one, and you might get lucky with an M1 exposed hit. If it is the Obsession you hook, then you get information on the next survivor. While random, it's still another survivor to chase. And there's really no downside to bringing this. The one thing about this perk that is kind of quote-unquote annoying, but I actually am fine with it, it does have a counter. If there are 2 survivors left, and technically this could happen when all of them are up, but it's hard to coordinate it. If there is 2 survivors left and you hook the Obsession or the non-Obsession, if the survivor just hides in a locker, they'll either block the aura read or the scream, depending on which is happening. So it can actually screw you over. There's been times when I've been looking for the Obsession and I can't find them because they didn't swap because Friends to the End activated and I didn't realize they were in a locker. But in general, it's just good information. It keeps the momentum of the game flowing, and being able to switch your Obsession on the fly can be very, very powerful if you bring the correct build for it. So, in general, batteries included, and Friends to the End get my thumbs up approval, and Hex 2 can play gets a thumbs down as much as I don't want it to. For those that don't know, Unknown's perks all have un in front of them, so this is going to be really annoying to talk about. Unbound, Undone, and Unforeseen are the 3 perks from the Unknown. Unbound probably being the best, and Undone being one of the worst perks in the game. I don't know how that happens, but behavior managed. Unbound, whenever you injure a survivor by any means for the next 30 seconds. When you vault a window, you will activate Unbound and get 7% haste for 10 seconds. Depending on the loop, this can be extremely powerful. In general, if you're able to vault a window immediately after injuring someone, just do it, just to get the 7%. Unless they're going to put you in a bad position for some reason, just do it. The 7% haste, especially on Springtrap, can be very beneficial. Again, it avoids the whole slowdown while you have your axe in your hand, which you can then kind of use to your advantage to leverage certain loops that you normally can't. As the example I often give with Shaq, you don't have to be nearly as precise. But it also means you could M1 someone and then maybe catch up and get an M2 depending on the loop. You'd be surprised how often that happens. And to a degree, you can catch up a little bit to life. It makes life not nearly as bad for you, as you can just fall through the window, get the 7% haste, and not fully catch up, but definitely get closer than you would have normally. Next is Unforeseen. Whenever you damage a generator, which means kick it, for the next 30 seconds, your tear radius is transferred to the gen, and it is a 32-meter tear radius. This includes for Springtrap, so just be aware of that, and gain the undetectable status effect. This isn't a bad perk. Springtrap is very funny with undetectable, and you are kicking gens a lot, but honestly, if you're going to do this, just bring your iridescent coin. It does basically the same thing. But that being said, if you combo this with the iridescent coin and access panel, you can kick a gen, have your terror radius there, throw your axe through a door and have your terror radius on the other side of the map, and then you're undetectable, so the survivors don't necessarily know where you're coming from a lot of the times. So, it can be good for that. But I'm not the biggest fan of Unforeseen. I know some Springtrap mains who love this perk, so I'm going to give it a thumbs up at the end of this just for that, but yeah. Last is Undone. I don't even really want to talk about this one. This perk has so much text for basically telling you it's worthless. Whenever a survivor fails a skill check, you get 3 tokens. You gain 3 tokens. Whenever you kick a gen, all of your tokens are expended. For each token you have, the gen will lose 1% of progress and be blocked for 1 second. It then has a cooldown of 60 seconds. Don't ask me why it has a cooldown, and don't ask me why it has to be failed skill checks. But just don't run this perk. I have nothing else to really say about Undone. If you want me to explain why it's bad, I'll do a full video on it. Honestly, I will. But Unbound and Unforeseen get a thumbs up. Undone gets the biggest thumbs down in probably the entire video, if I'm honest with you guys. Next up is the other purple guy, Vecna, with Dark Arrogance, Languid Touch, and Weave Attunement. Weave Attunement, it kind of got a little bit of a nerf because of because of the changes to Franklin's, but it's still very effective if you run it with Franklin's, and Springtrap doesn't necessarily make the best use out of Franklin's, but he can M1 people, as I've said before, and having that constant aura reading in a loop can be very good. Something also with Weave Attunement that people don't think about oftentimes is if you do get a kill on Survivor holding an item, they will drop the item on the hook. So you have permanent aura reading on that hook, basically within the next 12 meters or so. And they also suffer from the Oblivious status effect if they pick the item back up. So it can be pretty good in situations like that. But then again, if you're not building into it, I really don't recommend it too much. Dark Arrogance is a perk, I will die on the hill, that only 2 killers can realistically use very effectively. It makes it so you vault windows 25% faster, and whenever you're stunned by a pallet or blinded, your recovery speed is increased by 15%. I'm sorry, decreased by 15%. So basically you get stunned for longer and blinded for longer. The downside really isn't worth it for the upside on most killers. The exceptions, as I've said before, are Chucky and Xenomorph. The reason being is these 2 killers don't often get stunned very often. And on top of that, the timings they can do with the specific 25% vault speed helps them with very specific situations that only they really have to encounter. On top of the fact that Xenomorph has self-destruct bolt, so, potato, potato. I mean, you can combo this with a full vault build if you really want to, but I don't think it's worth it that much. Last is Languid Touch, which is a very powerful anti-exhaustion perk. Whenever a survivor scares off a crow within 36 meters of your location, Languid Touch activates and they suffer from exhausted for 10 seconds. It then goes on cooldown for 5. So this can counter Lithe, Dead Hard, Overcome, basically every single exhaustion perk with the exception of Dramaturgy and Sprint Burst. Dramaturgy it also can counter depending if the survivor uses it the moment they see you or if they wait. If they wait, it can counter it. If they don't, then it doesn't. Sprint Burst, obviously, nothing counters it but Mindbreaker. So, yeah. This is very good. It's also good information if you're paying attention to the cooldown in the bottom right while it's going off and you don't happen to see a survivor. You can look around for where the crows went up while it's on cooldown and see if a survivor's in that location. You can also combo this with Overwhelming Presence since it's change and get some very good information out of that, as when they disturb a crow and get exhausted, you'll get exact aura reading on them as long as it's within 32 meters. That is the one downside to this is it is 36 meters. That is quite a large range. Other survivors can proc this apart from the one that you are chasing, and sometimes they can give you false information to know if they are exhausted or not. But comboing it in general can be very good. It's one of those perks that you can kind of just slap on and it will do its job and can be very helpful in many situations where survivors would have used Lithe or Dead Hard or even, like I said, Overcome to kind of counter what you're doing. So overall, Dark Arrogance gets a thumbs down, Langwood gets a thumbs up, Weave Attunement gets a middle thumb. Weave Attunement's a hard one to really assess. Next up is Dracula. I was going to make a joke about him being a vampire, and I couldn't think of one. Oh well. We have Dominance, Wretched Fate, and Human Greed. Human Greed is an interesting aura perk, as whenever Survivor goes near a chest, you will get their aura for 5 seconds. It's 8 meters of a chest. It also allows you to close chests with a cooldown of 10 seconds. Don't worry too much about the closing of the chest thing. It also gives you the aura of all chests on the map, which is kind of interesting, and I don't really know if there's a way to really like benefit from that specifically too much, other than knowing where basement is at the start of the trial, which can be, again, very nice depending on what you're running. But the aura reading is the big thing here. Now, unlike a lot of aura reading perks similar to this, it does have a timer, which is very odd, but you'd be surprised how often this will randomly go off, especially the basement chest, as it does go through floors. On maps like Midwich, this can be extremely powerful. But Springtrap is also not the best on Midwich, so that should also be taken into account. It really comes down to what can you really do with the aura reading, but again, Springtrap can get around the map very quickly, relatively quickly with his doors, so you can use this to kind of get the jump on survivors. And if you combo it with some other perks, as well as like in specific scenarios, you can again get a lot of situational value from it. Again, you're going to start to notice that's a very big trend with a lot of perks, especially some of the newer ones. They're very situationally good, not generally good. Next is Dominance, which actually combos pretty decently well with Human Greed. Whenever a survivor interacts with a chest or a totem for the first time, it is blocked for 16 seconds, and you see the aura in white. This can help you protect your totems. Thrill of the Hunt can also help you protect your totems, so that should be noted that Dominance does have a little bit of competition there. And it is the first time that they touch the totem, so just be wary of that if you're not paying attention. A lot of times they can still get through this. I will often run this in if I'm running only one totem. So if I'm just running just Ruin, I will personally take Dominance over Undying or something like that, because the 16 seconds on top of the white aura read means I know where to go to start harassing someone. I know they're doing the totem, versus Undying where they just do it and there is a chance that they just do the other one as well. You can combo with all three of them if you really realistically want to, but if you're just running one totem, I think Dominance is actually the better option than a lot of other protection perks for your totems. Speaking of totems, we have Hex Wretched Fate. After a generator is completed, so the first gen, a dull totem becomes lit, and the obsession is cursed, giving them reduced repair speeds of 33%. The aura of the hex is revealed to them for within 12 meters. This perk is this perk is a very feast or famine, hit and miss. It encourages you not to really go for the obsession once it's lit, but at the same time you also want to be protecting your hex totem. So it's a very interesting perk and can be kind of frustrating to try to get use out of depending on what's going on. And on top of that, with the aura read on the totem, it can not last as long as you would like it to realistically. Again, you can combo this with Undying, you can combo this with Dominance, you can combo this with something like Dying Light to get that reduced speed on everybody, so it's not just the obsession also gets the reduced speed, so it can help you kind of snowball throughout the middle of the match as well. Do I recommend this perk? Not particularly, but there are builds that can run it, and if you are all for protecting your totems and maybe have something like Play With Your Food where you don't want to chase the obsession anyways or save the best for last, you can definitely run it with that to build into that fact that you're trying to avoid the obsession. Also, if you combo this with something like, for instance, at the end where you're swapping your obsession, the penalty is actually not there as much because the obsession will be hooked and then the obsession changes, so someone else gets the curse. So now they have to go find the totem or else they suffer from the reduced speed on repairing gens, so that should also be noted. So in general, Dominance, Wretched Fate, and Human Greed are actually very hard for me to thumbs up or thumbs down, as they are kind of build completing perks similar to like Singularity, and none of them really shine on their own, but only when they're comboed with other things. So in general, I kind of have to give them all a middle thumbs, if I'm perfectly honest. Then we have Houndmaster with All Shaking Thunder, No Quarter, and Jagged Compass. Two of the worst perks in the game, and probably one of the best support perks in the entire game. All Shaking Thunder, whenever you drop from a great height, don't ask me what is considered a great height. It's very finicky sometimes. Sometimes a hill counts, sometimes a small drop counts. I'm not fully sure, at least on the killer side. It's very easy to tell on the survivor side. Killer side's a little bit more difficult. For the next 25 seconds, you gain an increased lunge of 75%. It then has a cooldown of 5 seconds. So, this is basically coup de grace, but it activates when you drop from a great height. I don't recommend this perk in the slightest, simply because it is very map dependent. Because unlike a survivor who can run to a great height while they're in chase, the killer cannot stop what they're doing in the chase, go to a great height, drop, and then get this effect to happen. On top of that, the survivors get notified that you have it. They hear a vine blom whenever it activates. So they will be looking out for it if they know what's going on. Next is Scourge Hook Jagged Compass. I can talk today. At the start of the trial, blah, 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 4 Scourge Hooks. But the exception with this is whenever you hook someone on a Scourge Hook, you get the gen with the highest progression in yellow. This is already very powerful in Springtrap, as he can just teleport straight to it without the need for Bonnie's guitar strings. But the main draw to this perk is the fact that anytime a survivor is unhooked from a non-Scourge Hook, it becomes one. This can be comboed with Gift of Pain and Floods of Rage to immediately get their effects on any hook. And that's really where the main synergy of this comes into play. The yellow aura reading is good, it really is, but it is not the main effect of this. You can also combo it with Pain Res. While it doesn't get its effect once they're unhooked, now you have a hook that you know you've been to that will have the Pain Res effect, so it can be good in situations like that. It does help you fight those RNG situations of Scourge Hooks. On top of even things like Hangman's Trick, you can get more Scourge Hooks on the map, therefore more aura reading whenever you pick somebody up, which on its own can be very powerful. The ones that really doesn't count, or the only one it really doesn't work very well with is Monster Shrine, but that's because Monster Shrine isn't that good in the first place. Last is No Quarter. Whenever a survivor is self-healing, I need to make this very clear, whenever the survivor is self-healing, by any means, if they reach 75% healing progress, No Quarter activates, and they are hit with a slew of skill checks. If they miss the skill check, they are broken for 30 seconds. This perk would actually be pretty okay if it was on any form of healing. The fact that it's on self-healing means that you have to rely on the survivors either having a medkit or bringing self-care or strengthen shadows and they go to the basement. If they don't have one of these things, this perk literally does nothing for you, and that's one of its biggest problems. And even if it does activate and they happen to bring these things, much like Merciless Storm, you have to pray they miss the skill check to get effect. On top of that, if you don't happen to be near them while they're doing this, the broken for 30 seconds might not even matter. The only thing this might make someone do is waste a medkit. But if you're in a lobby that doesn't have any medkits, this perk is literally doing nothing for you. Overall, All Shaking Thunder and No Quarter get a thumbs down. Jagged Compass gets a thumbs up. Even on its own, it is good, but when comboed with other Scourge Hooks, it's even better. Next is King Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul. With Forever Entwined, Hex Nothing But Misery, and None Are Free. Alright, I want to talk about Hex Nothing But Misery. Not only is this perk bad in general, as you have to injure the survivor 8 times with basic attacks, and then a Hex is activated, and then the next time you injure them with a basic attack, they're hindered for 5% for 15 seconds. The hinder can be very strong, but the fact that it's 8 times with the basic attack makes it bad on Springtrap in general, but bad on most killers in general, if I'm perfectly honest with you. It really should be lowered. I have a feeling they don't want to lower it because then some other killers can abuse it if they aren't in one focus, like Blight. Which I think this is the first time I've seen a perk that was, in my mind, kind of nerfed because of Blight and not because of Nurse, which is really funny to me. But yeah, and then on top of that, it's a Hex, so they can get rid of it. Hooray. It can activate again, but if you get 16 hits, you probably won the match anyways, so who cares? None Are Free is an in-game perk. Every time you hook a survivor, you get a token. For every token, when all the generators are completed, all windows and upright pallets are blocked for 16 seconds per token, up to 64 seconds. This is a all-or-nothing perk. The one thing this has over Cool Limits, which is a guaranteed 30 seconds also, is that it does stop upright pallets. However, at the end of the match, a lot of the pallets should already be down or broken already. Even with the pallet density update, this is often the case. This can be okay in some maps, but for the most part, it kind of isn't really going to help you with much. You basically just bulldoze the survivors at the end of the match and can help you with those, like that last second kill, but it's still not that great. On top of the fact that you had to hook all 4 survivors, on top of the fact that if you don't happen to know where somebody is at the end of the match anyways, then it's not really 64 seconds, it's more like 20 seconds. So this perk has a lot of things going against it that I just don't recommend it, and think that people really are just going to overlook it for, again, other perks. And Cruel Limits does basically the same thing, it just doesn't affect pallets. And it's a guaranteed 30 seconds. Last is Forever Entwined, probably one of my favorite perks in the game. My bias will show with this one, it's very good. Whenever you enter Survivor, you get 1 token, up to a max of 8, increases your dropping, hooking, picking up speeds by 4% up to 32%. Should be noted that if you combo this with Fire Up, there is a limit on the pickup speed. I think it's coding reasons for animations, I'm pretty sure is why it's the case. But nothing else. The rest of it doesn't have a limit or anything. But this is probably the best example of a feel-good perk. That's the main reason I run this, and it works on M2 killers, so Springtrap can make decent use out of it. As well as being able to drop a survivor very quickly, you'd be surprised how often that can come into play. In general, though, this is one I can't even say is necessarily good. It just feels good to use. There will be situations that can help you avoid pallet saves and flashlight saves, and the survivors miss the timing by a little bit, so that should be noted. And once you build up to the stacks, again, it's any injury, so from your axe or from your M1. One thing that should be noted, for some reason, it does not give you stacks if you grab somebody, so do consider that. Overall, nothing but misery and none are free get thumbs down, and I'm only giving Forever Entwined a thumbs up, simply for 1, for contrast, and for 2, because I do think it's good. It's just, like, again, a feel-good perk. Next up is Springtrap himself, and these perks actually went through interesting changes, except for Help Wanted. Because of some things that have changed with Springtrap himself. So we're going to talk about Haywire, Help Wanted, and Phantom Fear. Haywire makes it so that whenever these survivors stop... Okay, the numbers on this are confusing to explain. If a gate is at least 80% done, if the survivors let go of it, it will regress back to 80% at 100% speed. So 1-to-1 on the timing. This perk is not good. You will find, like, these seldom 1 in, like, 100 matches where this actually does get value for you if you can stop the survivors from doing the gates. Now, it does stop 99ing, which can also be very frustrating for the survivors, but they do know it's in play because the lights will flicker, so they might not 99 in the first place. It's a give and take. It really depends on what you're looking for. I don't think it's worth running a lot of the times. Just run Nowhere to Hide or No Way Out, and it gives you a very similar effect to what this is doing, unless you're running like a very specific in-game build, but even then, I don't think this should take that slot. Batteries included is better. There's a lot of other better in-game perks. Next is Help Wanted, the other compromised gen perk. This one makes it so once the compromised gen is completed, you get 25% recovery speed on your basic attacks. So this is basically like a mini Stabiffle. Say the best for last, those that don't know the acronym. For 60 seconds, comboing this with machine learning is really the only way to use this. It is not very good on its own. It's not even very good with machine learning. Machine learning is just good on its own as well. But if you're going to run this, I almost would say you have to run it with machine learning to get really any value out of it. 25% sounds like a lot, but it really is not as much as it seems, especially on a killer like Springtrap who can't really do too much with the recovery speed unless he's in, like, the perfect situation. Last is Phantom Fear, and the reason why I said Springtrap, these have kind of changed a little bit, is because Haywire was nerfed because of Singularity abusing it, and Phantom Fear has actually changed where it was kind of pointless on Springtrap, but now that Bonnie's doesn't give you undetectable, it actually has kind of a use case with him. Whenever a survivor is within your terror radius and looks at you, they scream and reveal their aura for 2 seconds. The 2 seconds will be blocked by the scream bubble. However, if you run it with Lethal Pursuer and make it 4 seconds, you will see the aura, so it can help with that. It goes on cooldown for 60 seconds. Now, again, before, Springtrap wasn't very good with this because he was undetectable for half the match anyways. Even with the old Bonnie's guitar strings, he was undetectable a lot of the times because it would go from 20 seconds to 10 seconds. But now that Bonnie's guitar strings doesn't get the undetectable, you can combo this with that to almost get as much information as you need whenever you need it. Now, it does have a cooldown that should be noted, but a lot of times you would be surprised how often the specific information that it gives you, which is something it does have over Spies from the Shadows, is that the information is pinpoint. You know exactly where they are. As well as this is probably one of the best camping perks in the game. And I will die on this hill. You can camp so well with Phantom Fear. If you have someone on a hook, no one is showing up there without you knowing. Because they have to look at you in your direction. And then they scream, get their aura revealed, you can chase them off, leave them there, know which direction they're coming from, and everything like that. So in general, Haywire gets the thumbs down, Help Wanted gets the thumbs down, and Phantom Fear gets the thumbs up. I actually think Phantom Fear is very good, even on Springtrap. The aura read can help you know exactly where to go and which loops you're going to know if you can use your axe or not. Last, for the adept side of things, is the most recent killer added to the game, the Krasue, with Hex, Overture of Doom, Ravenous, and Wandering Eye. Hex Overture of Doom is the coolest named perk in the game. It sucks that it's not good. So this will curse the farthest gen from the Hex, as far as we know, and it will highlight it in yellow. If the survivors interact with that gen for at least 5 seconds, Overture of Doom activates. For 30 seconds, your terror radius is sent to the gen, and you are undetectable during those 30 seconds. The survivors get notified that they're hexed, so they know this is happening, so it's not very good for that. It only works on one gen, so if it happens to be the gen the survivors don't work on the entire match, it also doesn't do anything for you. This hex isn't useless, it's just not that great. The information can be okay, but because the survivors can avoid it almost completely, or again, just cleanse the hex, it's just not worth it for what it is. It is a hex that just doesn't do enough to justify being a hex. If anything, I kind of wish it just had a cooldown of like a minute or something. And then whenever a survivor does a gen outside of a certain range, then it activates. When it does work, it acts kind of like a mini Tinkerer, which is kind of cool. But on top of that, it does put your terror radius on the gen, so the survivors are prepped for it. They might also just start running away, so you can't even really use the information for what it's necessary for either, which can be very, very frustrating. Take it from someone who's tried to make this perk work. Next is Wandering Eye. Whenever you start a chase with a survivor, Wandering Eye activates, and any injured survivors within 20 meters of your location are revealed for 5 seconds. This has a 30-second cooldown. This is basically just better Office Phone. If I'm perfectly honest with you. The range is shorter, so it's more valuable and you can actually capitalize on it. It only works on injured survivors, and you actually get pinpoint aura location. Does that mean it's good? No. The biggest issue with this is the activation condition and the cooldown. I can see I've had situations where this has definitely given me value. I'm not going to say I haven't, but there are other better perks for this exact thing, and a lot of times you don't really need to know where survivors are when you start a chase. You need to know where they are after you end the chase. So things like Infectious Fright tend to be better for what this is trying to do. Not to say it's bad. I think it can use a buff, but on its own, it's just not that great. Last is Ravenous. Whenever you hook a survivor, you gain a token. When you gain 4 tokens, it has to be a unique survivor, by the way. All survivors are exposed for 60 seconds. This is an in-game snowball-y perk. I don't want to say in-game, but this is a game-finishing snowball perk. The problem with this perk is not actually its effect. Its effect is actually pretty okay. The problem with this perk is that Springtrap, when he isn't using his axe, is just a basic 115 killer and cannot make the most use out of the exposed status effect. If you're playing a killer like Kaneki, or even Dredge, for that matter, who can reliably hit M1s very quickly, depending on the situation, or even Clown or something like that, this can be very, very good. Springtrap can't do that. Every time I run this perk, I don't know if I'm cursed or what, but every time I run this perk, it just never works, and honestly, it ends up losing me the match a lot because I'm trying to get the value out of it when I could have just gone for an axe hit into an M1. So this one's at viewer discretion, but on Springtrap in particular, I don't think it's worth it. So, as much as I hate to say it, all of Krasue's perks get a thumbs down. Even though she has a better Office Phone somehow, I don't think they're worth running, which is a shame because these are the only real perks we're getting until the January update as of the recording of this. But it is what it is. Next up are the general perks. This is going to be the last section of this entire video. And all I'm really going to say here is that the general perks, most of them are not that great on Springtrap. However, because Pinhead is no longer available in the game, all of his perks became general, and they are very good on not just Springtrap, but just good in general. So there's no real way to divide these up with one exception, but we're just going to go through all of them, and I'm just going to kind of do a speed run of these. Bitter Murmur, decent perk, generator, aura. Once it's done, you can obviously, as Springtrap, go through a door once you see their aura and be able to do things from that. Deerstalker, this is great information for when you have a lot of downtime and don't really know exactly what you're doing all the time. Especially since it's rework, it can be very powerful. It should be noted that if you are undetectable from the door, this will still go on cooldown, but you will not get the aura read because they have to see your aura for you to see theirs. Distressing is distressing. I don't recommend running this perk at all outside of very specific builds, but for the most part, even then, you have other options. Hex, Fortune's Fool, which is actually Plaything, probably one of the best hexes in the entire game, but it's also a general perk now and one of Pinhead's old perks. Survivors get Oblivious whenever they are hooked, and they have to undo a totem to get the Oblivious to go away. Very, very powerful, can cause some decent slowdown, really good when combo with Pentimento. In general, Oblivious is also very good on Springtrap, and again, it can slow the game down overall. Noed. Noed is an interesting perk on Springtrap as the effect can be very good. It is Noed, but he has no inherent way to blind people, so they will find the hex eventually. It can save your in-game. If you're running it with an in-game build, obviously you can run it decently well, but the survivors don't heal because of Noed or Terminus. It should be noted that Loot Bag will not work. Again, they have to be healthy for Loot Bag to do its job. Thrill of the Hunt, very good perk to combo with other totems, obviously. If you're running a Hex build, Thrill of the Hunt can always be substituted in there. Maybe if you don't want to run Undying, making them take longer to do the totems can be more inherently better than making them have to do 2 totems. The time works out a little bit better that way, but yeah. Insidious, this was buffed recently to activate after 1 second of standing still. And as someone who's a fan of this perk, I'm going to say it's pretty okay, but obviously, for you to get use out of it, you have to stand still, and if you're not someone like me who tends to do that, it's not worth running it. Iron Grasp makes it so you can carry people longer. It does add about a second or two. It's really deterministic on a lot of factors, but for the most part, it's about a second. Not really worth it. There's other perks that do its job better, but if you don't have a better option, Iron Grasp can help you with that. No Holds Barred or Deadlocked, whichever one you prefer, another Pinhead perk. Whenever a generator is completed, the generator with the closest progression is blocked for 25 seconds. You see the aura of that gen in white. This is going to be a very good way not to necessarily slow the game down, but to stop momentum, which I think is actually more important than slowing the game down. It will stop those moments where you hear 3 gens pop at once. The gens will still probably get done relatively fast, but you will stop them all from popping. There are situations, though, where the survivors can 99 2 gens and do them at the same time and stop this from happening. It's not as common as you would think, and sometimes if one gen pops, the one gets blocked, the other one will also pop if 3 survivors are on 3 separate gens. Again, not as common as you would think. I think it's a pretty decent slowdown perk and one that can almost always just be thrown into a build and doesn't really have to be played around too much. Scourgehook Monstrous Shrine. I can't even defend this perk. This saves you about 7 seconds on people's hook timers, so if they are on the hook for 70 seconds, this saves you 7 seconds from that. It's not really worth it. It can mess with timings, and ironically, the survivors this works the best against are good survivors, not bad ones, because they have the deterministic of the timing and know when to go for the save for the very last second. But because it requires a Scourge Hook, and because it requires you to walk away from the hook before it actually starts activating, it's really not that great. You can try to run it with other things, but for the most part, it's just not very worth it. I've tried to use this to get door grabs by making people feel like they need to use the door to get to somebody before they enter their final stage, but yeah. Scourge Hook Weeping Wounds, probably one of the best Scourge Hooks. This gives anyone who's on a Scourge Hook, when they're removed, they get hemorrhaged and mangled for 90 seconds, and if they heal, they suffer from a action speed penalty of 16%. This is just overall just very good. It slows the game down in general. If the survivors decide not to heal because they don't want to suffer that regression penalty, then they're not healed for the entire match, which means that you get much easier downs. It should be noted that this can also be comboed with Jagged Compass, so once they come off the hook, they do still get afflicted with this. This is also known as Gift of Pain, by the way, for those who are wondering what the fuck Weeping Wounds is. Shattered Hope, probably one of the worst perks in the entire game. This is a perk that is specifically designed to make sure that boons never get out of control. And if the survivors don't break boons, you don't get to do anything with this perk. Don't use it unless we're in a boon meta, and even then, I wouldn't even recommend it for that. Sloppy Butcher, this grants Mangled and Hemorrhage whenever you M1 a survivor for 90 seconds. Not too bad. Mangled and Hemorrhage is not nearly as powerful as it used to be, and the fact that it's on a timer, I don't really think this is worth running, especially on Springtrap. While I do say a lot of times he is an M1 killer who happens to M2, I just don't think it's worth it a lot of the times. Run it if you really need a slowdown perk for healing, but there's other better options in more optimal situations, Gift of Pain being one of those. Spies from the Shadows. This is a really good information perk, 36 meters of info at almost all times with a 5-second cooldown in between it. The only caveat being that if a survivor is running Calm Spirit, they counter it, but that's not that common. In general, if you need an information perk for general chase or just when you're going around the map, I would recommend this. However, if you're playing Springtrap, that means that you have access to Phantom Fear, which, in my opinion, does the job of Spies from the Shadows, just with a longer cooldown. So it really is a toss-up on whether you want that longer cooldown for more accuracy, or if you want less accuracy for less cooldown, and the possibility that the survivors don't disturb crows. Because if they are crouching around or are ratting in a corner or something, Spies won't go off, but Phantom Fear will. Unrelenting, whenever you miss a basic attack, it's reduced by 30%. This can be decently okay in like very niche situations. That being said, Springtrap is one of the few killers that does have a situation where this is pretty good in, and it's if you happen to mess up an axe grab. I'm not saying run this because of that, but I'm just saying if that annoys you, then you have this perk as an option for that. Whispers, uncounterable information within 32 meters. One problem is that it does take some triangulation to actually determine where the survivor is. But once you can nail that down and get through that learning curve, it is probably the most powerful information tool in the entire game. Should be noted that this does affect people on hook and survivors on the ground as well, so you do need to be careful with that. So overall, Bitter Murmur gets a thumbs up, Deerstalker gets a thumbs up, Distressing gets a thumbs down, Plaything gets a thumbs up, Noed gets a middle of the road, Thrill the Hunt gets a thumbs up if you're running it with a hex, thumbs down if you're not, Insidious gets a middle of the road, Iron Grass gets a thumbs down, Deadlock, No Holds Barred, whichever you want to call it, gets a thumbs up. Monster Shrine gets a thumbs down. Get to Pain gets a thumbs up. Shattered Hope gets a thumbs down. Sloppy Butcher gets a thumbs down. Spies from the Shadows gets a thumbs up. Unrelenting gets a thumbs down. Whispers gets a thumbs up. This is a lot to go through with the general perks. I know. I just kind of wanted to speed run these. The general perks are ones you don't have to worry about progressing or like earning in certain ways, so I didn't think it was necessary to really go too in depth with them. But yeah. So with that, that's every single perk explained on Springtrap. Now, obviously, there were some that are just generally good and not only good for Springtrap, and that should be noted. And I'm going to have on screen here the entire list of the thumbs up, middle thumbs, and thumbs down for all of this. And you might be asking, Bennett, why didn't you just do a normal tier list? And the reason I didn't do a normal tier list is because a lot of perks are hard to determine due to the fact that they have build requirements or are only specifically good on Springtrap. So I felt this was a much easier and concise way to actually determine what was good and bad by having the 3 tiers. Middle of the road stuff, obviously, that's stuff that's mostly personal preference or kind of requires a build. But overall, I had a lot of fun doing this. This is probably the longest video I've ever edited and made out. But hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you all in the next video. Have a good one. Yeah. Bye.